A gunshot echoed through the darkness of the western night. Eleanor Grace, a woman in a simple dress, stood trembling with a rifle in her hands, smoke still rising from its barrel. Before her, a man fell to the ground, blood spreading across the white snow. Behind her, Matthew Harden, the husband she had married just months ago, held a child in his arms, his eyes filled with astonishment. "My father was right about you," the wounded man whispered. "Even angels can become demons." 6 months earlier, the Wyoming wind carried dust and whispers as Sister Eleanor Grace stepped off the stagecoach in Redfern Ridge. The small town, if it could even be called that, consisted of little more than a general store, a saloon, and scattered wooden structures that seemed to lean against the wind rather than stand against it. Eleanor adjusted her habit, a shield of black and white, against the harsh reality of the frontier. 10 years she had worn it, 10 years since she had left behind the name Emily Sutton and the life that came with it. 10 years since she had fled not from God but toward him, hoping he might hold the pieces no man ever would. "Sister." A woman approached, weathered face creased with both suspicion and respect. "I'm Mrs. Calloway. The committee asked me to show you to the schoolhouse." Eleanor nodded, her voice soft but steady. "Thank you. I appreciate your kindness." The schoolhouse turned out to be little more than a single-room shack with a bell hanging from a post outside. Inside, rough-hewn benches faced a small desk, and a blackboard leaned against the far wall. A narrow staircase led to what Mrs. Calloway explained would be Eleanor's living quarters. "It ain't much," the woman admitted, "but it's what we have. Winter comes early here, sister. You might want to consider something sturdier before the snows." Eleanor looked around at what would be both her classroom and her chapel. "God provides," she said simply. Mrs. Calloway's expression suggested she thought God might need some help in this particular instance. "Town meetings tonight at the saloon. Folks will want to meet you." After the woman left, Eleanor climbed the narrow stairs to her new home, a single room with a bed, a washstand, and a small window that faced east. She unpacked her few belongings, a Bible, a rosary, and a carefully wrapped portrait of Saint Teresa of Avila. As she placed the saint's image on the wall, she caught her own reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. At 32, her face remained youthful beneath the wimple, but her eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived much longer. Sometimes in moments of weakness, she wondered if those eyes would ever look young again. From below, shouts erupted. Eleanor moved to the window and saw men gathering in front of the saloon across the street. A fight was brewing. She recognized the signs from her childhood in Boston, where her father's dock workers would sometimes resolve disputes with their fists rather than words. Two men circled each other, one significantly larger than the other. The crowd had formed a loose ring around them, some shouting encouragement, others looking uncomfortable. Eleanor was about to turn away, this was not her business, when a third man stepped between the combatants. Even from a distance, there was something commanding about him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that caught the late afternoon sun. He spoke words she couldn't hear, but his posture was unmistakable, not threatening, but unyielding. The larger man spat on the ground, said something that made the crowd murmur, then backed away. The smaller opponent nodded to the intervener with what looked like grudging respect. Just as the tension began to dissipate, the larger man suddenly lunged forward, a flash of metal in his hand. Eleanor gasped, but the tall man moved with unexpected grace. He sidestepped the knife, caught the attacker's wrist, and twisted. The weapon fell to the dirt. A moment later, the attacker was on his knees, arm bent behind him at an angle that made Eleanor wince. The tall man said something else, then released his hold. The would-be knife wielder scrambled to his feet and hurried away. The crowd began to disperse, but not before the peacemaker looked up directly at Eleanor's window. Their eyes met across the distance. Something electric passed between them, a jolt that made Eleanor step back from the window, her heart suddenly racing in a way it hadn't for a decade. "Foolishness," she whispered to herself, reaching for her rosary. But as she fingered the familiar beads, the stranger's gaze remained imprinted in her mind, eyes the color of coffee left too long on the stove, deep and knowing, and somehow familiar. The town meeting was held in the saloon, though the owner had made concessions for the occasion, covering the bar with a cloth and removing the more risque paintings from the walls. Eleanor sat straight back near the front, conscious of the curious glances and whispers that followed her. Mayor Collins, a portly man with an impressive mustache, introduced her to the assembled townspeople. Sister Eleanor Grace comes to us from St. Mary's Convent in Pennsylvania. The diocese has kindly sent her to establish a proper school for our children. Eleanor stood, hands folded before her. I'm grateful for your welcome, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite its softness. I look forward to serving God and your community through education. She scanned the room as she spoke, noting the mix of expressions: hope from mothers with young children, indifference from most of the men, open skepticism from others. Near the back, partially hidden in shadow, stood the tall man from earlier. Unlike the others, he wasn't looking at her, but at the floor as if deep in thought. After the formalities, people approached to introduce themselves. Mothers told her about their children, shopkeepers offered discounts, and the local doctor, a surprisingly young woman named Dr. Charlotte Webb, promised to visit the school regularly. Wyoming Territory's been giving women the vote since '69, Dr. Webb explained with pride. Some things we do better out here than back east. As the crowd thinned, Eleanor found herself approached by a frail woman with a boy of about 10 at her side. The woman's face was gaunt, with the telltale flush of consumption on her cheeks. Sister, I'm Sarah Reeves. This is my son, Timothy. Her voice was melodic, despite its weakness. He's a bright boy, reads already. I taught him myself. Timothy looked up at Eleanor with solemn eyes, neither shy nor bold, simply watchful. Something about him reminded Eleanor of her younger sister lost to scarlet fever when Eleanor was just 16. The same thoughtful gaze, the same quiet dignity. It's wonderful to meet you both, Eleanor said, smiling at the boy. I look forward to having you in my classroom, Timothy. Sarah coughed into a handkerchief, then straightened. We live a ways out. I work at the Harvey Ranch, helping with cooking and sewing. Mama's the best cook in the territory, Timothy said, the first words he'd spoken. Sarah's smile was tinged with sadness. That's kind of you to say, dear. She turned back to Eleanor. We should go. It's a long walk back. You're welcome at the schoolhouse anytime, Eleanor told them. Classes will begin Monday next. As they turned to leave, Eleanor noticed the tall man watching them from across the room. When Sarah saw him, she nodded with a familiarity that suggested they knew each other well. The man touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement, his eyes lingering on Timothy with unmistakable concern. Later, as Eleanor prepared to leave, Mayor Collins pulled her aside. Sister, I should warn you, the schoolhouse isn't the sturdiest structure. Wyoming winters are brutal. We've had 3 teachers before you, none lasted more than a season. I'm not afraid of hardship, Mayor. No, I don't imagine you are. He hesitated. But perhaps you might consider alternative arrangements when the snow comes. Several families would be willing to board you. Eleanor thanked him for his concern, but made no commitments. As she stepped outside, the night air bit at her cheeks, a reminder that autumn was already giving way to winter's approach. Stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky, more than she'd ever seen in Boston or at the convent. A movement caught her eye, the tall man from before leaning against a hitching post, smoking a cigarette. As she passed, he straightened and removed his hat. Evening, sister. His voice was exactly as she'd imagined it would be, deep with the slightest rasp like thunder before rain. Good evening, Matthew Harden. He extinguished his cigarette against the post. You met Sarah and Timothy. It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. They seem like fine people. They are. His gaze drifted toward the road leading out of town. Long walk back to Harvey's in the dark. Do they have no horse or wagon? A muscle tightened in Matthew's jaw. Ranch owners, not the generous type. He looked at her directly then. You planning to teach the Bible along with reading and figures? The question surprised her. Of course, God's word is the foundation of all learning. And what about doubt? You teach that too? Eleanor studied him, trying to understand the challenge in his voice. Doubt is part of faith, Mr. Harden. Even the greatest saints questioned. Something flickered in his expression, recognition, perhaps even respect. That's so. Never heard a nun admit to questioning before. I'm a Benedictine sister, not a nun, Mr. Harden, and I believe God gave us minds to use, not simply to accept. He seemed about to say more when shouts erupted from the saloon. Matthew glanced over his shoulder, then back at Eleanor. You should get back to the schoolhouse, sister. Nights get rowdy here once the meeting's done. With a final nod, he turned and walked toward the commotion, shoulders set, as if preparing for another intervention. Eleanor watched him go, struck by the contradiction. He presented a peacemaker who carried himself like a warrior, a man who spoke of doubt but watched over a woman and child like a guardian. As she walked back to the schoolhouse alone, Eleanor found her thoughts drifting not to prayers or lesson plans, but to eyes the color of overbrewed coffee and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. The first week passed in a blur of introductions and preparations. 12 children enrolled in Eleanor's school, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Timothy Reeves was indeed as bright as his mother had claimed, reading at a level well beyond his years and showing a particular aptitude for mathematics. Each morning, Eleanor rang the bell at precisely 8 o'clock, and her pupils filed in from farms and ranches scattered across the surrounding countryside. Some arrived on horseback, others by wagon, and a few like Timothy on foot, having walked miles before dawn. On a Friday afternoon, as the children were leaving, Timothy lingered at his desk, a book clutched in his hands. "Is there something you need, Timothy?" Eleanor asked gently. He hesitated, then extended the book toward her, a worn copy of Robinson Crusoe. "Mama said I could lend it to you. It's my favorite." Eleanor accepted the offering with appropriate solemnity. "That's very kind. I'll take good care of it. Mama says books are friends that never leave you." His voice was quiet but clear. "Even when people do." The words struck Eleanor with unexpected force. "Your mother sounds very wise." Timothy nodded. "She is, but she's been coughing more. Dr. Webb gave her medicine, but—" He trailed off, shoulders slumping under the weight of worry no child should bear. Eleanor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Would you like me to pray with you for her?" The boy looked up, hope and skepticism warring in his young face. "Does it help praying?" A question that had haunted Eleanor's own heart many times over the years. "I believe it does, Timothy. Not always in the ways we expect, but God hears us. Mr. Hardin says God's got selective hearing." Timothy's matter-of-fact delivery made it clear he was quoting directly. Eleanor suppressed a smile. Mr. Hardin and God might have a complicated relationship. Mama says Mr. Hardin used to talk to God professionally. This revelation startled her. "What do you mean?" Timothy shrugged. "Don't know exactly. Just something I heard Mama tell Dr. Webb once. Mr. Hardin doesn't like talking about before." Before, the word hung in the air, before Red Fern Ridge, before Wyoming, before whatever had brought them all to this remote corner of the frontier. Everyone here seemed to have a before, Eleanor realized, including herself. After Timothy left, Eleanor found herself pondering in Matthew Hardin with renewed curiosity. A man who talked to God professionally could only mean one thing: he had been clergy of some kind. A minister, perhaps. It would explain his literacy, his ability to command respect, and his cryptic questions about doubt. That evening, as Eleanor prepared a simple supper in her small quarters, a knock at the schoolhouse door interrupted her thoughts. She descended the stairs to find Dr. Charlotte Webb standing on the threshold, medical bag in hand. "Hope I'm not disturbing you, sister," the doctor said. "Thought I should check in, see how you're settling." Eleanor welcomed her inside. "Very well, thank you. The children are eager to learn." Charlotte smiled, removing her hat. "They're good kids, mostly. Tough like everything out here has to be." She glanced around the schoolhouse. "Mayor Collins mentioned concerns about your winter accommodations." "The Lord will provide," Eleanor said, more from habit than conviction. Charlotte's expression turned wry. "With all due respect to the Lord's sister, Wyoming blizzards don't much care about divine intervention. Last winter, we lost 2 trappers who got caught just a half-mile from town. Froze solid before morning." Eleanor gestured toward the stairs. "Would you care for some tea? Doctor, it's not much, but—" "Call me Charlotte, please. And yes, tea would be lovely." Upstairs, as they sat at Eleanor's small table with steaming cups, Charlotte spoke frankly. "I worry about Sarah Reeves. The consumption's getting worse." Eleanor's hands tightened around her cup. "Timothy mentioned she's been coughing more. Is there nothing to be done?" Charlotte sighed. "Mountain air sometimes helps, but she's weakening. Working herself to death at that ranch doesn't help, but she needs the money. And Timothy's father died before they came west, as I understand it. Sarah doesn't talk much about her past." Charlotte sipped her tea. "She and Hardin seem to have some connection, though no one knows exactly what. He watches out for them as much as she'll allow." Eleanor thought of the way Matthew had looked at Timothy in the saloon. They're fortunate to have such a friend. Hardin's a good man, Charlotte said. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's fair. Runs a small ranch north of town, does well enough. She paused. Some find him intimidating, but I've never seen him raise a hand except to stop others from doing harm. As if summoned by their conversation, a sound outside drew their attention, the steady rhythm of approaching hoofbeats. Charlotte moved to the window. Speak of the devil. Eleanor joined her to see Matthew Hardin dismounting from a large bay horse. He carried something wrapped in canvas, what looked to be firewood. Seems you've made an impression, Sister, Charlotte remarked, amusement coloring her voice. Eleanor felt a flush rising to her cheeks, ridiculous for a woman of her age and station. Nonsense, he's simply being neighborly. Charlotte's knowing smile suggested she wasn't convinced. I'll take my leave then. Neighborly visits are best not crowded. Despite Eleanor's protests, the doctor gathered her things. They descended together, meeting Matthew at the door just as he was about to knock. Doctor, sister, he nodded to each of them, had already removed. Evening, Hardin, Charlotte said cheerfully. Just checking on our new teacher. She's in fine health, you'll be pleased to know. Matthew's expression remained impassive, but Eleanor thought she detected a slight color beneath his tan skin. Good to hear. Well, I'll be off. Patience to see. Charlotte winked at Eleanor as she pondered. Remember what I said about winter preparations, sister? Left alone with Matthew, Eleanor found herself unaccountably nervous. Mr. Hardin, what brings you here this evening? He hefted the canvas bundle. Noticed your wood pile's low. Winter's coming faster than usual this year. That's very thoughtful, but it's nothing. He moved past her to stack the wood beside the small stove that heated the schoolhouse. This place leaks heat like a sieve. Mayor should have fixed it proper before bringing you out here. Eleanor watched him work, efficient and thorough. You seem to know a lot about buildings, Mr. Hardin. Built my own place. His response was clipped, focusing on his task. When he finished, he straightened, brushing sawdust from his hands. In the lamplight, Eleanor could see details she'd missed before: a small scar near his right eyebrow, the way his dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the calluses on hands that had clearly known both labor and purpose. Thank you, she said simply. He nodded, then seemed to hesitate. Saw Timothy today on my rounds. Said he's learning about maps and oceans. Eleanor smiled. He's a quick study, asks wonderful questions. His mother taught him well. Matthew's expression softened when he spoke of Sarah and her son. She's not doing well, sister. So Dr. Webb mentioned, is there anything I can do? Matthew considered her question with unexpected seriousness. Just keep teaching the boy. Sarah wants him to have more than... He trailed off, then shook his head slightly. More than what's likely coming. The implication hung heavy in the air between them. Eleanor's heart ached for Timothy, for the loss he might soon face. I'll do everything I can for him. I know you will. Matthew's certainty surprised her, given how little they knew each other. He reached for his hat, preparing to leave. Nights are getting colder. That stove won't keep up once real winter hits. So I've been told repeatedly, Eleanor said, a hint of dry humor creeping into her voice. Apparently I should expect to freeze solid before Christmas. The corner of Matthew's mouth twitched almost a smile. Wyoming folks like to scare Easterners. Makes them feel tough. He paused at the door. But they're not wrong about the cold. You should consider other arrangements. The Lord helps those who help themselves, he finished for her. At least that's what preachers used to tell me. Before she could respond to this oblique reference to his own past, he was gone, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the gathering darkness. The first snowfall came in early October, earlier than even the oldest residents of Red Fern Ridge had predicted. Eleanor woke to a world transformed, the dusty streets now blanketed in white, the distant mountains crisp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at it. The children arrived bundled in whatever warm clothing their families could provide. Some wore proper coats and boots, while others made do with layered shirts and rags wrapped around their shoes. Timothy appeared in a coat several sizes too large for him, the sleeves rolled up to free his hands. Mr. Hardin lent it to me, he explained when Eleanor commented on it. Said I'd grow into it. Throughout the day, the snow continued to fall, soft but steady. By afternoon, Eleanor began to worry about the children's journey home. When the usual dismissal time arrived, she made a decision. We'll end early today, she announced. I want everyone to get home safely before the snow gets deeper. The older children helped the younger ones bundle up. Eleanor watched from the doorway as they departed in groups, the Collins children in their father's wagon, the Peterson twins on their sturdy ponies, others collected by parents who had anticipated the early dismissal. Timothy stood beside her watching the others leave. "I can walk," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. The snow was already ankle-deep. Eleanor looked down at him, remembering Charlotte's words about trappers freezing just a half-mile from town. "Absolutely not. We'll wait for your mother." But as the last of the other children disappeared from view, there was still no sign of Sarah. The snow fell heavier now, the wind beginning to pick up. "She might be busy at the ranch," Timothy said, worrying his lower lip. "Sometimes Mr. Harvey doesn't let her leave if there's work." Eleanor made a swift decision. "We'll wait a little longer, then I'll walk with you." Timothy's eyes widened. "It's 3 miles to Harvey Ranch." "Then we'd better hope your mother arrives soon," Eleanor said with more confidence than she felt. Another hour passed with no sign of Sarah. The snow showed no signs of abating, and daylight was beginning to fade. Eleanor knew they couldn't wait much longer. "Timothy, go upstairs and warm yourself by my stove. I need to think." While the boy obeyed, Eleanor considered their options. Walking 3 miles in deepening snow seemed increasingly dangerous, but staying at the schoolhouse overnight wasn't ideal either. Her supplies were limited, and Sarah would be frantic when she found the school empty. A sound outside drew her attention, not hoofbeats this time, but the jingle of harness bells. She opened the door to find Matthew Harden driving a sturdy wagon with a canvas cover stretched over its bed. "Mr. Harden," he nodded, his face grim beneath his snow-dusted hat. "Sarah sent me. She's taken bad, can't leave her bed." Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. How serious? Bad enough. He didn't elaborate, but his expression told her everything. "Timothy's still here. Upstairs, I'll get him." When Timothy saw Matthew, his face crumpled. "Mama's worse." Matthew knelt before the boy, placing large hands on his small shoulders. "She's resting. Dr. Webb's with her. She wanted me to make sure you were safe." Timothy nodded bravely, but his eyes filled with tears. "Can I see her? That's why I'm here." Matthew glanced at Eleanor. "Roads are getting bad. We should go now." "I'll come too," Eleanor said without hesitation. "He shouldn't be alone." Matthew didn't argue, just helped them both into the wagon. The interior was surprisingly warm, with blankets piled on the wooden benches that ran along each side. Once they were settled, he climbed onto the driver's seat and set the horses in motion. The journey was slow and increasingly treacherous. What should have been a 30-minute ride stretched to nearly 2 hours as Matthew carefully navigated drifts and hidden ruts. The wind howled around them, finding every gap in the canvas covering. Eleanor held Timothy close, whispering prayers as the wagon lurched and swayed. The boy had been stoic at first, but as time passed, he grew increasingly agitated. "What if we're too late?" he whispered, voicing the fear that Eleanor herself dared not articulate. "Your mother is strong," she assured him, "and God is watching over her." "Mr. Harden says God watches but doesn't always act," Timothy said, his voice muffled against Eleanor's coat. Before she could formulate a response to this troubling theology, the wagon came to a sudden stop. Matthew's voice called from outside, tense and urgent. "Stay inside. Something's wrong." Eleanor peered through the canvas flap. They had stopped in what appeared to be the middle of nowhere, no buildings visible through the swirling snow, just white emptiness in all directions. Matthew stood in the snow beside the wagon, looking around with an expression she couldn't decipher. "We should have reached the turnoff to Harvey's by now," he said when he caught her watching. "I can't find the landmarks." The realization hit Eleanor with chilling force. They were lost in a Wyoming blizzard, precisely the situation Charlotte had warned her about. "What do we do?" Matthew's face was grim as he assessed their situation. "Can't go forward if I don't know where we are. Can't go back in these conditions. We'll have to wait it out." "But Sarah is with the doctor." His tone brooked no argument. "We're no good to her frozen." Timothy began to cry, then quiet sobs that shook his small frame. Eleanor held him tighter, looking to Matthew with silent desperation. The cowboy's expression softened. "Hey, Timothy, remember what I taught you about surviving in the wild?" The boy looked up, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Stay put, stay warm, stay alive." "That's right, and that's what we're going to do here." Matthew reached into the wagon and ruffled the boy's hair. "Your mama's tough. She'd want you safe. As if to punctuate his words, the wind surged, rocking the wagon. Snow seeped through the canvas covering, dusting their shoulders and hair. "We can't stay here," Eleanor said, eyeing the deteriorating shelter. Matthew nodded, scanning the white landscape. "There's a line of trees to the north. Might be Cottonwood Creek. If it is, my ranch is just beyond." "And if it isn't?" Eleanor asked quietly so Timothy wouldn't hear. Matthew met her eyes directly. "Then we pray your God is listening today, sister." The decision made, they abandoned the wagon, Matthew carrying Timothy, while Eleanor followed in their tracks. The snow reached midway up her calves, each step an effort. The wind cut through her habit like it was made of paper rather than wool, and her feet quickly went numb despite her sturdy boots. They walked for what seemed like hours, but was probably less than one. Eleanor's world narrowed to the broad back of Matthew Harden as he forged ahead. Timothy clutched against his chest. She repeated the Hail Mary with each labored step, no longer sure if she was praying for Sarah, for Timothy, or for herself. Just when Eleanor thought she could go no further, Matthew stopped abruptly. Through the curtain of snow, a dark shape materialized, a building of some kind. "My ranch," Matthew confirmed, a relief evident in his voice. "We made it." The structure that emerged from the storm was larger than Eleanor had expected, a proper two-story house built of solid logs with a wide porch and shuttered windows. Adjacent stood a barn and what appeared to be a bunkhouse, though it was hard to distinguish details through the blowing snow. Matthew led them to the main house, struggling one-handed with the door while still holding Timothy. Once inside, blessed warmth enveloped them. A fire burned low in a large stone fireplace, casting flickering light across a surprisingly comfortable interior. "Get those wet things off," Matthew instructed, setting Timothy down. "I'll stoke the fire." Eleanor helped Timothy out of his borrowed coat and sodden boots, while Matthew built the fire to a roaring blaze. The main room was spacious and unexpectedly refined, a large oak table with 6 chairs, a well-worn leather armchair, bookshelves filled with volumes and handcrafted furniture that spoke of skill and care. As warmth returned to her limbs, Eleanor took in more details, a painting of mountains above the fireplace, curtains at the windows, a rug that looked like it might have come from back east. This was not the Spartan cowboy's cabin she had imagined. "There are rooms upstairs," Matthew said, returning with blankets. "Timothy can take the first one on the right. You can have the one beside it." Timothy looked up from where he sat huddled by the fire. "But Mama is with Dr. Webb," Matthew said firmly. "We can't reach Harvey's tonight. The storm's too bad." "But she needs me," the boy insisted, new tears welling. Matthew knelt before him, his large hands gentle on the boy's shoulders. "Your mama loves you more than anything in this world, Timothy. She sent me to keep you safe because that's what matters most to her. The best thing you can do for her right now is stay alive and well." Timothy's small shoulders slumped in defeat. "Promise we'll go first thing tomorrow." "First light," Matthew agreed. "Now let's get you warm and fed." While Matthew prepared a simple meal of beans and bacon, Eleanor took Timothy upstairs. The room Matthew had indicated was small, but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a handmade quilt. "Try to rest," she told the exhausted boy. "I'll be right next door if you need anything." Timothy nodded, climbing under the quilt, fully dressed. "Sister Eleanor, do you think Mama's afraid being alone?" The question pierced Eleanor's heart. "I think your mother is very brave, Timothy, and she knows you're safe, which will give her peace, my fuss." "Mr. Harden will get us there tomorrow," Timothy said with absolute conviction. "He always keeps his promises." Eleanor smoothed his hair. "Yes, I believe he does." After Timothy fell into an exhausted sleep, Eleanor explored her own assigned room, similar to the boys, but with a larger bed and a small desk beneath the window. Like the rest of the house, it showed attention to comfort and detail that surprised her. Downstairs, she found Matthew at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in his hands and worry etched across his features. "Timothy's asleep," she reported, taking the seat he indicated. Matthew nodded. "Storm's getting worse. Never seen one hit this early or this hard." "Do you think Sarah—" She couldn't finish the question. "Charlotte Webb's a good doctor." He stared into his cup. "And Sarah's survived worse than a cough." Something in his tone suggested personal knowledge. Eleanor studied him across the table, remembering Timothy's words about Matthew having talked to God professionally. "This is a lovely home," she said, changing the subject. "Did you really build it yourself?" A hint of pride crossed his face. Most of it had help with the stonework. It's not what I expected. From a cowboy. His voice held a note of challenge. From someone who chooses to live alone so far from town, she clarified. Matthew's expression closed like a shutter. Not everyone's meant for company, sister. Yet you've made room for it, she observed, gesturing to the 6 chairs around the table, the multiple bedrooms upstairs. He didn't answer directly. Coffee, or I might have tea somewhere. Coffee is fine, thank you. She accepted the cup he poured. Mr. Harden, may I ask you something personal? His shoulders tensed visibly. You can ask. Timothy mentioned something about you once talking to God professionally. Were you a minister? The cup in Matthew's hand stilled halfway to his lips. For a long moment he didn't speak. Then, a long time ago, in another life. What denomination? Does it matter? No, she admitted. I'm simply trying to understand you better. Matthew set his cup down with deliberate care. Presbyterian. Before you ask, I left the church. The church didn't leave me. May I ask why? His laugh was harsh without humor. Turns out, sister, when tragedy strikes on your watch, parishioners prefer a pastor who doesn't question God's plan. Eleanor absorbed this, thinking of her own moments of doubt behind convent walls. Questioning is not the same as abandoning faith, Mr. Harden. Isn't it? His eyes met hers directly. Then tell me, Sister Eleanor, what brings a woman to lock herself away from the world in what, 22, 23? The directness of his question startled her. 23, she answered without thinking, running toward God or away from something else. The accuracy of his assessment, so close to her own thoughts earlier, left her momentarily speechless. When she found her voice, it was softer than she intended. Perhaps both. Something shifted in Matthew's expression, a recognition, perhaps even respect. He didn't press further, instead rising to check the fire. Eleanor watched him, this contradiction of a man, former minister turned rancher, solitary, yet building a home for many, gruff in manner, yet gentle with a frightened child. And something else nagged at her, a sense of familiarity she couldn't place, as if she'd known him in that before they all carried. We should get some rest, Matthew said, breaking into her thoughts. Morning will come early, and the ride to Harvey's won't be easy even if the storm lets up. Eleanor nodded, rising from her chair. Thank you for everything today. He acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod. Good night, sister. Good night, Mr. Harden. She paused at the foot of the stairs. For what it's worth, I believe God still hears you whether you're wearing a collar or not. Something flickered in his eyes, pain or memory, she couldn't tell which. Get some sleep, sister. Tomorrow will test us all. Eleanor woke to urgent shaking. Timothy stood beside her bed, face pale in the pre-dawn light filtering through the window. Sister Eleanor. Wake up, Mama needs me. She sat up quickly. Timothy, what's happened? I had a dream, he said, voice trembling. Mama was calling for me. We have to go now. Eleanor took his small hands in hers. It was just a dream, Timothy. It's still dark out. No, it was real. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Please, Mr. Harden will take us if you ask him. The desperation in his voice was impossible to ignore. Eleanor pulled on her boots and followed Timothy downstairs, where they found Matthew already awake, stoking the fire. He looked up as they entered. You felt it too, he said to Timothy, not sounding surprised. The boy nodded vigorously. She's calling for me. Matthew's face was grave as he straightened. Storm's let up some. We can try for Harvey's if we leave now. Eleanor looked between them, bewildered by this apparent shared understanding. It was just a dream. Some things can't be explained, sister. Matthew cut her off gently. Get your coat. We're leaving in 10 minutes. The ride to Harvey Ranch was tense and silent. Matthew had hitched a sleigh rather than the wagon, the runners sliding more easily over the deep snow. The storm had indeed lessened, though occasional gusts still whipped snow into their faces. Timothy sat between them, rigid with worry. Eleanor kept an arm around him, praying silently for Sarah for safe passage, for whatever awaited them at their destination. Harvey Ranch emerged from the whiteness like a smudge on paper, a collection of weathered buildings centered around a main house that had seen better days. As they approached, Eleanor spotted Charlotte Webb's buggy outside the smallest structure, likely the workers' quarters. Before the sleigh fully stopped, Timothy was scrambling down, running toward the building. Matthew caught him by the collar. Wait, he said firmly. Let me go first. The boy struggled briefly, then subsided. Matthew approached the cabin alone, knocking once before entering. Long minutes passed while Eleanor held Timothy's hand, both of them watching the door with mounting anxiety. When Matthew finally emerged, his expression told them everything. Timothy broke free from Eleanor's grasp and ran toward him, a wordless cry escaping his lips. Matthew caught the boy kneeling in the snow to hold him at eye level. "She's asking for you, son," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "She's been holding on waiting." Timothy's face crumpled, but he nodded bravely. "Is she going to heaven?" Matthew didn't soften the truth. "Soon, but not yet." The interior of the cabin was warm but sparse, a single room with a bed table and stove. Sarah Reeves lay beneath several blankets, her face waxen against the rough pillow. Charlotte Webb stood nearby, her expression solemn. "Timothy," Sarah whispered as the boy approached, her voice barely audible. "I'm here, Mama." He climbed onto the bed beside her, small hands reaching for hers. Eleanor hung back near the door, not wanting to intrude on this most intimate of moments. Matthew stood beside her, his presence solid and somehow necessary. "Mr. Harden," Sarah called, her eye finding him in the shadows. "You'll remember your promise." Matthew stepped forward. "I remember, Sarah." She nodded weakly, then turned back to her son. "Timothy, remember what I told you about Mr. Harden. He's going to look after you when I can't." The boy's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I want you to look after me." "I know, my love. I'd stay if I could." She stroked his hair with trembling fingers. "But when I can't be here anymore, Mr. Harden will make sure you're safe. You'll mind him, won't you? Be a good boy." Timothy nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I promise." Sarah's gaze drifted to Eleanor. "Sister, is that you?" "Ooh." Eleanor moved closer. "Yes, Mrs. Reeves, I'm here." "You'll help him with his lessons." Each word seemed to cost her tremendous effort. "Of course, he's a wonderful student." Sarah smiled faintly. "He needs more than books, needs—" Her voice faded, strength ebbing. Charlotte stepped in, checking Sarah's pulse. "She needs to rest now." But Sarah rallied, reaching for Matthew's hand. "Today," she whispered. "Must be today." Matthew's face tightened, but he nodded. "I understand." Sarah's eyes closed, her breathing shallow but steady. Charlotte motioned them outside, where the snow continued to fall in gentle flakes. "She's held on longer than I expected," the doctor said quietly. "But it won't be much longer now. Hours, maybe." Timothy had remained inside with his mother. Through the small window, Eleanor could see him curled beside Sarah on the bed, his head on her shoulder. "What did she mean, must be today?" Eleanor asked Matthew. He stared at the closed-door, conflict evident in his expression. "Sarah made me promise to take Timothy when the time came, not to let Harvey put him in an orphanage." "Of course not," Eleanor agreed. "But why today specifically?" Matthew and Charlotte exchanged a look laden with meaning. It was Charlotte who answered. "Harvey returns from Cheyenne today. He's made it clear he won't have a child without a mother taking up space in his workers' quarters." Anger flashed through Eleanor. "That's monstrous. The boy's mother is dying." "Harvey's not known for his charity," Matthew said, his voice flat. "Sarah's been working here practically for free these past months just to keep a roof over Timothy's head." Charlotte adjusted her shawl against the cold. "I need to get supplies from town." "Sister, will you stay with them?" "Of course." After Charlotte departed, Eleanor and Matthew stood in silence, watching the snow drift down around them. The beauty of it seemed obscene against the tragedy unfolding inside the cabin. "What will happen to Timothy?" Eleanor finally asked. Matthew's jaw tightened. "I meant what I told Sarah. I'll take him in." "You alone." The words slipped out before Eleanor could stop them. He turned to her, eyes hard. "You think I can't care for a child?" "That's not what I meant," she backpedaled. "It's just that what a bachelor shouldn't raise a boy, that I need a woman's touch." His voice was bitter. "The world's full of orphans, raised by single fathers, sister. Or do you think I'm particularly unsuited because of my lapsed faith?" Eleanor met his challenging gaze steadily. "I think a child who's just lost his mother needs stability, routine, and someone who can be present. You run a ranch single-handedly, Mr. Harden. When would you have time for a grieving boy?" The logic of her argument seemed to deflate some of his defensiveness. "I'd hire help, adjust." "And what of his schooling?" Would you bring him to town each day, or would he miss his education? Matthew ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident. What would you have me do, sister? Let Harvey ship him off to some orphanage in Cheyenne. Or maybe you think the good Lord will magically provide a solution? Before Eleanor could respond, a sound from inside the cabin drew their attention. Timothy calling for them. They rushed inside to find Sarah awake, her breathing labored. Matthew, she gasped, reaching for him. Now, before it's too late. He took her hand, kneeling beside the bed. Sarah, are you sure? She nodded weakly. He needs a home, a family. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor, then back to Matthew. Both of you. Understanding dawned on Eleanor with shocking clarity. Mrs. Reeves, are you suggesting marriage? Sarah confirmed each syllable in effort. Matthew needs a wife. Timothy needs a mother. Her eyes beseeched Eleanor. Please, he's a good man, better than he knows. Eleanor stood frozen, unable to process what was being asked of her, marriage to a man she barely knew. It was impossible, absurd. Yet as she looked at Timothy's tear-stained face, at Sarah's desperate eyes, at Matthew's conflicted expression, something shifted inside her. Wasn't this what she had prayed for in those quiet moments of doubt within convent walls? A sign that God had a different path for her, a way to serve that used all of her heart, not just the parts left unbroken. Mrs. Reeves, she began carefully, I'm a Benedictine sister. I've taken vows. Temporary vows, Sarah whispered. I know. About orders. My cousin, Ursuline. This revelation startled Eleanor. How much did this dying woman know about her? About the nature of her commitment? Even so, Eleanor continued, what you're suggesting is madness, Matthew interrupted. Sarah, you can't ask this of her, of either of us. But Sarah's gaze remained fixed on Eleanor. You came here for a reason, not just to teach. Her breathing grew more labored. Timothy needs you. Both. Timothy looked between the adults' confusion mixing with grief on his young face. What's happening? Matthew placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Your mother is worried about what will happen to you. She wants to make sure you're taken care of. By you, Timothy said with a child's certainty. You promised. Yes, Matthew agreed. But your mother thinks you need... He trailed off, looking to Eleanor with an expression she couldn't decipher. A family, Sarah supplied, her voice fading. A real family. Eleanor felt as though the ground beneath her feet had shifted. This morning she had been Sister Eleanor Grace, a woman dedicated to God and education. Now she stood at a dying woman's bedside, being asked to become something else entirely, a wife, a mother, a partner in raising a soon-to-be orphaned child. I need time to think, she said finally. To pray. Sarah's eyes fluttered closed. No time, she whispered. Harvey returns. Sundown. Matthew stood abruptly. This is too much, Sarah. The sister has her own life, her own calling. As did you, Sarah countered, rallying briefly. Yet here you are. The statement seemed loaded with meaning Eleanor couldn't fully grasp. Matthew's expression closed and he turned away, moving to stare out the small window. Sarah beckoned Eleanor closer. When she leaned down, the dying woman whispered, He needs healing. As much as Timothy, you can help him find his faith again. Mrs. Reeves. Sarah, she insisted. My name is Sarah, and I'm asking you, as a mother, save my son. Her eyes bright with fever and desperation held Eleanor's. Save them both. A gunshot echoed through the darkness of the western night. Eleanor Grace, a woman in a simple dress, stood trembling with a rifle in her hands, smoke still rising from its barrel. Before her, a man fell to the ground, blood spreading across the white snow. Behind her, Matthew Harden, the husband she had married just months ago, held a child in his arms, his eyes filled with astonishment. My father was right about you, the wounded man whispered. Even angels can become demons. Eleanor lowered the rifle, her hands trembling violently now that the moment had passed. The man before her, her father, Judge Jeremiah Sutton, clutched his bleeding shoulder, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. Emily, he gasped, using the name she had abandoned a decade ago. What have you become? But that was not today. That moment lay 6 months in the future, a culmination of choices not yet made. In Sarah Reeves' small cabin, time seemed suspended. Outside, snow continued to fall in gentle flakes, while inside the soft rasping of Sarah's breath marked the passing seconds. Timothy sat beside his mother, small fingers intertwined with hers, while Matthew stood at the window, shoulders rigid with tension. Eleanor had retreated to a corner of the room, mind racing. What Sarah proposed was impossible, a marriage of convenience between a Benedictine sister and a former minister brought together solely to provide a home for an orphaned boy. It was absurd, desperate, the plea of a dying woman grasping at any solution for her child's future. And yet, Eleanor's fingers found the rosary in her pocket, thumb moving over the familiar beads. 10 years ago, she had fled to the convent, not just out of devotion, but out of heartbreak, seeking sanctuary from a world that had wounded her too deeply. Her vows were temporary, renewable each year by choice rather than permanent commitment. Each December, she had chosen to renew them, but always with a question in her heart: is this truly my path? A soft moan from Sarah drew Eleanor back to the present. The woman's breathing had grown more labored, her skin waxy and pale. Timothy looked up, fear etched across his young face. "Mama," he whispered. Sarah's eyes fluttered open. "Still here, my love," she managed, though the words were faint. Charlotte Webb had not yet returned from town. The storm, while diminished, still made travel difficult. Eleanor moved to the bedside, checking Sarah's pulse, as she had seen the doctor do. It fluttered beneath her fingers like a trapped bird. "Sister," Sarah whispered, beckoning her closer. Eleanor leaned down. "Try to rest, Mrs. Reeves." "No time for rest," Sarah insisted. "Need to know. Timothy will be safe." Her eyes, bright with fever, searched Eleanor's face. "You're a good woman. Can see it. Timothy trusts you." "I'll always be his teacher," Eleanor assured her. "I'll look after him at school." Sarah shook her head weakly. "Not enough. Needs a home. Family." Her gaze drifted to Matthew, who remained by the window. "He promised to take Timothy, but a boy needs a mother too." "There must be other solutions," Eleanor said gently. "Other families in town who could—" "No one Matthew trusts," Sarah interrupted. "No one I trust." She gripped Eleanor's hand with surprising strength. "Please consider it." Before Eleanor could respond, the cabin door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Charlotte Webb, snow dusting her coat and hat. "Sorry I'm late," the doctor said, shaking off the snow. "Roads are treacherous." She assessed the scene quickly, moving to Sarah's side. "How is she?" "Worse," Matthew answered from the window. "Fever's higher." Charlotte checked Sarah's pulse, her expression grave. "Sarah, I've brought medicine to make you more comfortable." "Won't help," Sarah whispered. "Just want to see Timothy settled." Charlotte glanced between Matthew and Eleanor, sensing the tension in the room. "What's happening here?" Matthew pushed away from the window. "Sarah's got the idea that Sister Eleanor and I should marry to give Timothy a proper home." Charlotte's eyebrows rose. "I see." She looked at Eleanor with new interest. "And what does the sister think of this plan?" All eyes turned to Eleanor. She felt the weight of their expectations. Sarah's desperate hope, Matthew's conflicted resistance, Timothy's confusion, Charlotte's clinical assessment. "I think," Eleanor said carefully, "that we should focus on making Sarah comfortable right now. There will be time for decisions after." But Sarah shook her head again, more forcefully. "No time. Harvey returns today. Told me Timothy can't stay. Either goes to orphanage or goes with whoever takes him." She looked imploringly at Matthew. "You promised." "I know," Matthew said, his voice rough. "And I meant it. I'll take him, Sarah. You have my word." "But the judge—" Sarah's voice faded, her strength ebbing. Eleanor caught the reference. "Judge? What judge?" Matthew and Sarah exchanged a look laden with meaning. Charlotte busied herself preparing a dose of medicine, deliberately focused on her task. "Sarah believes a single man won't be granted guardianship," Matthew explained reluctantly. "That the territorial judge will send Timothy to an orphanage regardless of my promise." "Is that true?" Eleanor asked Charlotte. The doctor sighed. "It's happened before. Wyoming law favors traditional families for orphan children unless there's a blood relation." Sarah rallied again. "Matthew needs a wife. You need a proper home before winter." Her eyes beseeched Eleanor. "God brought you here for a reason." The conviction in Sarah's voice struck Eleanor. How many times in the convent had she prayed for a sign, for some indication that God had a specific purpose for her? Was this desperate situation somehow an answer to those prayers? I need to pray, Eleanor said, rising. Alone. Matthew nodded toward the door. Use the front porch. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. Outside, the world was hushed beneath its blanket of snow. Eleanor stood on the weathered porch of the cabin, breath clouding before her. The beauty of the landscape, pristine white, stretching to distant mountains, contrasted sharply with the turmoil in her heart. Lord, she whispered, what would you have me do? No thunderous response came, no burning bush or angelic visitation. Just the soft fall of snow and the distant cry of a hawk wheeling against the pale sky. Eleanor closed her eyes, thinking of Timothy, his solemn eyes, his quiet dignity, the way he read books as if they contained not just knowledge, but salvation. She thought of Matthew Harden, his contradictions, his lost faith, the gentleness he showed the boy despite his gruff exterior. And she thought of her own journey from Boston debutante to heartbroken novice to dedicated sister. What was the greater service to God to maintain her vows and continue teaching, knowing Timothy would likely end up in an orphanage, or to take this unexpected path to become wife and mother to help a dying woman's son? The answer didn't come in a flash of revelation, but in a gradual settling of certainty. When Eleanor re-entered the cabin, her decision was made. Sarah lay with Timothy curled against her side, both asleep from exhaustion. Matthew sat at the small table while Charlotte arranged bottles of medicine nearby. I need to speak with Mr. Harden, Eleanor said quietly. Alone. Charlotte nodded, moving to sit beside Sarah's bed. Matthew followed Eleanor outside, his expression guarded. In the pale winter sunlight, Eleanor faced the former minister. If I were to consider Sarah's proposal, she began, I would need to understand exactly what it would entail. Matthew's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of his surprise. You're actually considering this? I'm considering what's best for Timothy, she corrected, and fulfilling a dying woman's last wish. He studied her for a long moment. It would be a marriage in name only, he said finally. For Timothy's sake, for legal purposes. You'd have your own room at the ranch. I'd provide for you both, make sure the boy continues his schooling. And my teaching, you could continue if you wished. Town's not so far by sleigh in winter. Eleanor nodded, thinking through the practicalities. I would need to write to my mother superior, explain the circumstances. Would they release you from your vows? My vows are temporary, renewed yearly, she explained. Given the circumstances, a child's welfare at stake, they might understand. Matthew's expression remained skeptical. And if they don't, then I would have a difficult choice to make, she'd admitted. But I believe God sometimes calls us to unexpected service. A shadow crossed Matthew's face. God's ways are mysterious indeed, he said, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Eleanor studied him, this complex man who had once been a minister but now spoke of God with such ambivalence. Mr. Harden, if we were to do this, I would need to know that you respect my faith, even if you no longer share it. I've never disrespected genuine faith, sister, he said quietly. Only hypocrisy. And I would need to know that you're committed to Timothy's well-being, not just his physical needs, but his heart and mind as well. At this, Matthew's expression softened. I give you my word on that. The boy deserves a chance at a good life. Eleanor took a deep breath. Then if Sarah still wishes it, and if Timothy accepts the arrangement, I am willing. Matthew looked genuinely startled. Just like that, you'd give up your vocation, marry a stranger, become an instant mother to an orphaned boy. Not just like that, Eleanor corrected, after prayer and consideration, and not giving up my vocation but perhaps finding a new expression of it. She met his gaze directly. Unless you object to the plan. For a moment he seemed at a loss for words. Then it's madness, he said, but without conviction. Complete madness. Perhaps, Eleanor agreed, but sometimes madness is exactly what faith requires. Before Matthew could respond, the cabin door opened and Charlotte appeared. Sarah's awake, she said, asking for you both. Inside, Sarah had rallied somewhat, sitting propped against pillows with Timothy still at her side. Her eyes, though fever-bright, were alert and questioning as Eleanor and Matthew entered. Well, she asked, her voice stronger than before. Matthew looked to Eleanor, leaving the answer to her. Eleanor moved to Sarah's bedside, taking the woman's frail hand in hers. If this is truly what you wish, she said gently, then yes, I will marry Mr. Harden and help raise Timothy. Relief flooded Sarah's face. Thank God, she whispered. Timothy will have a home. Timothy looked between the adults, confusion evident. What does that mean, Mama? Sarah stroked his hair. It means when I go to heaven, you'll live with Mr. Hardin and Sister Eleanor. They'll be your new family. The boy frowned. But Sister Eleanor is a nun. Nuns don't get married. Sister Eleanor is making a special exception, Sarah explained, because she cares about you. Timothy considered this, then looked at Eleanor with solemn eyes. Would you still be my teacher? Yes, she assured him, and I would help take care of you at Mr. Hardin's ranch. With the horses, Eleanor glanced at Matthew, who nodded. Yes, with the horses. Timothy seemed to accept this nestling closer to his mother. But you won't go to heaven yet, will you, Mama? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Not today, my love. Not just yet. Charlotte cleared her throat. If you're serious about this, there's the matter of timing. Harvey will be back by sundown. And a minister, Matthew added. Nearest one's in Laramie, 2 days' ride in good weather. Judge Parker is in town today, Charlotte said. Circuit court. He could perform a civil ceremony. Sarah gripped Eleanor's hand. Today, she insisted. Please. Need to see it. Before, the urgency in her voice was impossible to ignore. Eleanor looked to Matthew, who seemed equally cornered by circumstance and promise. The judge it is, he said with a sigh. If he'll do it. Charlotte nodded briskly. I'll fetch him. He owes me a favor for setting his daughter's broken arm last month. She gathered her coat. Give me 2 hours. After she left, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. Matthew excused himself to tend to the horses, leaving Eleanor alone with Sarah and Timothy. The boy had drifted back to sleep, exhausted by emotion and disrupted rest. He's a good man, Sarah said softly, watching Eleanor's face. Carries too much guilt, but a good man. You seem to know him well, Eleanor observed. Sarah's smile was tinged with sadness. Known him since Boston. He was my pastor. She paused, gathering strength. When the fire happened, he saved many, but blamed himself for those he couldn't. Eleanor absorbed this new information. The fire at his church, Sarah nodded. 7 died. Not his fault, but he couldn't forgive himself. Her eyes drifted to her sleeping son. He helped us come west after my husband died. Gave us hope. Did you love him? Eleanor asked the question, emerging before she could consider its propriety. Sarah's laugh was weak but genuine. Not like that. He was my pastor, my friend. Always saw me as his responsibility. She reached for Eleanor's hand again. But he looks at differently. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. Mrs. Reeves. Sarah, the woman insisted. Sarah, Eleanor amended. You must understand this arrangement is for Timothy's sake. Mr. Hardin and I barely know each other. Sometimes God's plan isn't clear, though, at first, Sarah whispered. But trust me, I've seen how he watches you, different than others. Before Eleanor could respond to this unsettling observation, the cabin door opened, admitting Matthew with an armful of firewood. He added logs to the stove, then stood awkwardly, clearly uncertain of his place in this transformed situation. Charlotte will be back soon, he said finally, with the judge. Eleanor nodded, her mind racing. In a matter of hours, she would be leaving behind Sister Eleanor Grace to become Mrs. Eleanor Hardin, wife to a man she barely knew, and mother to a soon-to-be orphaned boy. The sheer impossibility of it threatened to overwhelm her. I should prepare, she said, rising. Is there somewhere I might wash up? Matthew pointed to a small side door. Pumps out back. I'll heat some water. While Matthew busied himself with practical matters, Eleanor stepped outside again. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and silent. She found the pump behind the cabin and splashed cold water on her face, the shock of it clarifying her thoughts. Was she making a terrible mistake or following divine guidance? The line between the two had never seemed so thin. When she returned inside, she found Sarah attempting to brush Timothy's hair, her hands too weak to manage the task. Eleanor gently took the brush from her. Let me, she offered, smoothing the boy's unruly dark locks. Timothy submitted to the attention with the stoicism that seemed to characterize him, his eyes never leaving his mother's face. Sarah watched them, satisfaction evident in her tired eyes. You'll be a good mother, she said softly. Timothy needs gentleness and strength. You have both. Eleanor's hand stilled momentarily. Mother, the word resonated through her awakening longings she had thought long buried beneath her vows. Once she had dreamed of children of her own before heartbreak had sent her to the convent sanctuary. I'll do my best for him, she promised, resuming her careful brushing. Matthew returned with heated water and a small mirror, which he set on the table without comment. His quiet efficiency spoke of a man accustomed to managing alone, making do with what was available. Eleanor wondered what it would be like to share a home with such a man, distant yet capable, reserved, yet fundamentally decent. As if reading her thoughts, Matthew said, "My place isn't fancy like your convent probably was, but it's solid, keeps out the cold." It seemed quite comfortable from what little I saw, Eleanor assured him. Much nicer than the schoolhouse, certainly. A hint of pride crossed his face. Built most of it myself, added the second floor last year. For what purpose? Eleanor asked, curious about the spacious home a single man had constructed. Matthew's expression closed. Had my reasons, he said, shortly moving to stoke the fire. Sarah caught Eleanor's eye, a knowing look passing between them. There was a story there, one Sarah seemed familiar with, but which remained a mystery to Eleanor. The sound of approaching horses announced Charlotte's return. She entered with a flurry of cold air, accompanied by a thin, elderly man in a black coat and spectacles. "Sister Eleanor Matthew," Charlotte said briskly, "this is Judge Elias Parker. Judge, these are the people I told you about." Judge Parker removed his hat, revealing a bald head fringed with white hair. "Dr. Webb has explained the unusual circumstances," he said, his voice surprisingly deep for his slight frame. "While I must say this is among the more unorthodox marriages I've been asked to perform, I understand the urgency." He moved to Sarah's bedside, bowing slightly. "Mrs. Reeves, I presume Dr. Webb has told me of your condition." "My condolences." Sarah nodded weakly. "Thank you for coming out, Judge. Need to see my son settled." The judge turned to Eleanor, studying her with shrewd eyes. "Sister Dr. Webb tells me you're willing to renounce your religious vows to marry Mr. Harden and provide a home for the boy." "I haven't formally renounced anything yet," Eleanor clarified. "But yes, I am willing to enter this marriage for Timothy's sake. You understand such a marriage, while legally binding, might not be recognized by your religious order." "I understand," Judge Parker turned to Matthew. "And you, sir, you're prepared to take on a wife and child in one fell swoop." Matthew squared his shoulders. "I gave my word to Sarah that I'd care for Timothy. If this is what it takes to keep that promise, then yes." The judge sighed. "Very well, I'll perform a civil ceremony. The paperwork can be filed in Cheyenne when the weather permits." He glanced at Sarah. "Though I understand time is of the essence." Timothy had woken during this exchange and now looked between the adults with increasing understanding. "You're getting married today?" he asked Matthew. "To Sister Eleanor." Matthew knelt to the boy's level. "Yes, son, so that you can come live with us after—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "After Mama goes to heaven," Timothy completed softly. He considered this information carefully. "Will I have to call you Pa?" A flicker of emotion crossed Matthew's face. "You can call me whatever feels right to you." "Matthew is fine." Timothy nodded, then turned to Eleanor. "What about you? You won't be Sister Eleanor anymore." The question hit her with unexpected force. She had been Sister Eleanor for a decade, her identity wrapped in that title and the vocation it represented. "I'll be Mrs. Harden," she said, testing the sound of it. "But you can still call me Eleanor if you'd prefer." Timothy seemed satisfied with this. He looked at his mother. "Is this what you want, Mama?" Sarah reached for his hand. "More than anything, my love. To know you'll be safe and loved." Judge Parker cleared his throat. "Shall we proceed? Then I have court at 4. They gathered at Sarah's bedside, Eleanor and Matthew standing before the judge, Charlotte as witness, and Timothy beside his mother, whose eyes shone with fever and desperate hope. The ceremony was brief and austere, the judge's words echoing in the small cabin like stones dropped into still water. When he asked for the ring, Matthew produced a simple gold band from his pocket. "Was my mother's," he explained quietly to Eleanor's questioning look. The metal was cold as he slipped it onto her finger, his calloused hand steady against her trembling one. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, no kiss was exchanged, only a solemn nod of acknowledgement between two strangers now inexplicably bound. "I've prepared guardianship papers as well," Judge Parker said, producing documents from his coat. "Mrs. Reeves, if you are able to sign." Sarah managed a shaky signature formally granting custody of Timothy to Matthew and Eleanor in the event of her death. The document complete, she sank back against the pillows, exhaustion evident. "It's done," she whispered. "Thank God." Charlotte ushered the judge out, promising to return shortly. Left alone with her new husband's stepson and the dying woman who had orchestrated it all, Eleanor felt a surreal detachment, as if watching events unfold from a great distance. "I should fetch our things from town," Matthew said, breaking the silence. "If Harvey returns and finds us here—" "Go," Sarah urged. "I'm tired now. Need to rest." Her eyes found Eleanor's. "You'll stay?" "Of course," Eleanor assured her, adjusting the blankets around Sarah and Timothy, who had climbed back onto the bed beside his mother. After Matthew departed, promising to return before sundown, Sarah drifted into uneasy sleep. Timothy remained vigilant at her side, his small hand clutching hers, as if by sheer will he could keep her tethered to this world. Eleanor sat nearby, fingering the unfamiliar ring on her hand. Mrs. Matthew Harden. The name felt like a costume she had donned for some elaborate theatrical production, not her true identity. Yet the ring was real, the marriage certificate bearing her signature real, the sleeping boy who was now legally her responsibility real. She reached for her rosary, the familiar beads a comfort in this sea of strangeness. As she prayed, she wondered what her Mother Superior would say when she received Eleanor's letter explaining this extraordinary turn of events. Would she understand that Eleanor had acted out of compassion, not abandonment of her vows, or would she see it as a betrayal of her calling? These thoughts occupied her as the afternoon waned, the light through the cabin's small window, shifting from white to gold as the sun began its descent. Sarah slept fitfully, her breathing increasingly labored despite Charlotte's medicines. Timothy eventually succumbed to exhaustion as well, curled protectively against his mother's side. Charlotte returned as dusk approached, checking Sarah's condition with a grave expression. "It won't be long now," she said softly to Eleanor. "The fever's consuming her last strength." "Should we wake Timothy?" Eleanor asked. "To say goodbye." Charlotte considered this. Let him sleep a little longer. Children remember their mothers as they last saw them. Better he remembers her sleeping peacefully than— She didn't need to finish. Eleanor nodded, understanding the mercy and letting the boy's final memory be one of quiet rest rather than agonizing departure. The sound of approaching horses broke the stillness, multiple riders by the sound of it. Charlotte moved to the window. "Harvey," she confirmed, "and Matthew, thank goodness." The door opened moments later, admitting Matthew and a heavy-set man with a florid face and expensive coat, clearly the ranch owner, Harvey. Behind them came two ranch hands looking uncomfortable at the scene before them. "This is quite the gathering in my property," Harvey said, his voice loud in the quiet cabin. "Dr. Webb's sister." He nodded to each, then frowned at the sleeping figures on the bed. "Mrs. Reeves still with us, I see." Charlotte's expression tightened. "Not for much longer, Mr. Harvey. Some respect would be appropriate." Harvey had the grace to look abashed. Of course, terrible business." He turned to Matthew. "Harden here tells me there's been a development regarding the boy." Matthew stepped forward. "Timothy will be coming to live with me and my wife when Sarah passes." "Wife?" Harvey's eyebrows rose. "Since when do you have a wife?" "Since today," Matthew said evenly. "Judge Parker performed the ceremony this afternoon." Harvey's gaze swung to Eleanor, comprehension dawning. "The sister you married, the nun." He gave a short, incredulous laugh. "Well, I'll be damned." "Watch your language," Matthew warned, his voice low. Harvey raised his hands in mock surrender. "No offense meant, just surprised is all." He glanced at the bed again. "So the boy goes with you two when she's gone?" "That's settled." "It's settled," Charlotte confirmed. "Legal guardianship papers signed and witnessed." Harvey nodded, seeming relieved to have the matter resolved without further obligation on his part. Good. Mrs. Reeves has been a hard worker, but I can't be running an orphanage." His callousness made Eleanor's blood boil, but Matthew placed a restraining hand on her arm, his touch conveying a clear message. "Not now. We'll be out of your hair by morning," Matthew told Harvey. "One way or another." The ranch owner nodded. "See that you are." He gestured to his men. "Come on, boys. Let's leave the doctor to her work." After they departed, Matthew turned to Eleanor. "I brought the sleigh, loaded our things from town. The schoolhouse is locked up, tight." The finality of his words struck her. There would be no returning to her small room above the schoolhouse to the life she had known just that morning. Thank you, she said, because what else could she say to this stranger who was now her husband? Sarah stirred, then her eyes opening. Matthew, she called weakly. He moved to her side immediately. I'm here, Sarah. Is it done, the papers? All signed and legal, he assured her. Timothy will stay with us. Relief washed over her face. Good, that's good. Her gaze shifted to Eleanor. Thank you for this gift. Eleanor took her hand. Rest now, we'll watch over Timothy. Sarah's eyes closed again, but her lips moved in a whisper. Wake him soon. Time's short. The next few hours passed in a vigil of whispered conversations and silent prayers. Charlotte administered more medicine to ease Sarah's increasing discomfort. Matthew sat in stoic silence, occasionally stepping outside to check the horses or gather more firewood. Eleanor remained beside Timothy, who continued to sleep exhaustion, temporarily shielding him from the inevitable grief to come. As midnight approached, Sarah's breathing changed, becoming more shallow, with longer pauses between each labored inhalation. Charlotte nodded to Eleanor, the silent communication clear. It was time. Gently, Eleanor roused Timothy. Wake up, dear one, she whispered. Your mother needs to speak with you. The boy came awake instantly, years of caring for his ailing mother having trained him to alertness. Mama, Sarah's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice. Timothy. She breathed, her hand seeking his. My beautiful boy. Matthew moved to the bedside, his presence solid and reassuring. Eleanor stood to give them space, but Sarah's weak voice stopped her. Stay, she insisted. Family. Together. And so Eleanor remained part of this strange new family formed in extremity, bound by promise and compassion rather than blood or romantic love. Sarah spoke to Timothy in whispers, her strength fading, but her love evident in every labored word. She reminded him to be brave, to mind his new guardians, to remember her in his prayers. The boy listened with tears streaming silently down his face, nodding at each instruction, making promises he would carry into his future. When Sarah's voice finally failed her, Matthew knelt beside the bed. You rest easy now, he told her. Your boy will be cared for. You have my word. Sarah's eyes found Eleanor's, a question in them. I'll love him as my own, Eleanor promised, and I will make sure he never forgets you. Peace settled over Sarah's features. She gestured weakly for Timothy to come closer, pressing a kiss to his forehead with the last of her strength. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry her very soul, Sarah Reeves slipped away. Charlotte confirmed what they already knew, gently closing Sarah's eyes. Timothy made no sound, his small body rigid with the effort of containing his grief. When Matthew placed a hand on his shoulder, the boy turned and buried his face against the man's chest, finally allowing his tears to flow. Eleanor watched them, this man and boy, united in loss, and felt the weight of her new responsibility settle upon her heart. She was no longer just Sister Eleanor Grace, dedicated to God and education. She was Eleanor Harden, wife and mother, bound by vows of a different kind. Outside, the wind began to rise, carrying the promise of another storm. The journey to Matthew's ranch was silent and somber. Timothy sat between them in the sleigh, wrapped in blankets against the bitter cold, his grief a palpable presence. Eleanor kept an arm around him, offering what comfort she could, while Matthew focused on guiding the horses through the increasing snowfall. They had left Sarah's body with Charlotte, who promised to arrange a proper burial once the ground thawed enough in spring. Timothy had been allowed to say a final goodbye, tucking his mother's favorite handkerchief beside her before they covered her face. Now, as the sleigh glided over the snow-covered ground, Eleanor felt the enormity of the change in her life. Just 2 days ago, she had been Sister Eleanor Grace, secure in her vocation. Now she was Mrs. Harden, married to a stranger, responsible for a grieving child, headed to a home she barely remembered from their brief shelter during the storm. The ranch emerged from the darkness like a haven, windows glowing with lamplight, smoke rising from the chimney. Matthew had sent one of Harvey's men ahead to prepare the house, ensuring it would be warm when they arrived. Home, Matthew said quietly, the first word he'd spoken in hours. Timothy looked up at the sturdy 2-story structure, his expression unreadable. Eleanor squeezed his shoulder gently. It's a lovely home, she said. Your mother would be pleased you'll be living here. The boy nodded, though whether in agreement or simple acknowledgement was unclear. Matthew helped them down from the sleigh, then led the horses toward the barn. Go on inside, he told them. I'll see to the team. Eleanor took Timothy's hand and guided him to the house. Inside, lamps had been lit in the main room, and the fire burned cheerfully in the stone fireplace. The contrast between the warm, welcoming space and the grief they carried made Eleanor's throat tighten. "Are you hungry?" she asked Timothy, uncertain what else to offer. He shook his head. "Just tired." "Of course, let's find your room." Upstairs, Eleanor discovered that the room Timothy had occupied during their previous stay had been transformed. A small trunk sat at the foot of the bed, one she recognized from Sarah's cabin, and on the pillow lay a familiar book, the copy of Robinson Crusoe Timothy had lent her. "Mr. Harden must have brought your things," she said, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gesture. Timothy approached the bed, slowly reaching for the book. "Mama said I should always have this," he said, his voice small. "It was my piece." Eleanor sat beside him on the bed. "Would you like me to read some of it to you? Sometimes stories help when we're sad." The boy considered this, then nodded. "Just a little bit." Eleanor opened the book to the first page and began to read, her voice soft in the quiet room. Timothy leaned against her, his small body gradually relaxing as the familiar words washed over him. By the third page, his eyes had closed, exhaustion finally claiming him. Carefully, Eleanor removed his boots and helped him under the covers, leaving the book beside him on the pillow. She smoothed his hair back from his forehead, noticing for the first time how his dark lashes lay against his pale cheeks, how vulnerable he looked in sleep. "Rest well," she whispered, feeling a surge of protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. Downstairs, she found Matthew adding wood to the fire, his movements deliberate and efficient. He looked up as she entered. "Timothy's asleep," she reported. "He was exhausted." Matthew nodded. "Best thing for him right now. Sleep dulls the edges." Eleanor sensed he spoke from experience. "Thank you for bringing his things. The book especially, it means a great deal to him." Sarah mentioned it was important. Matthew straightened, suddenly awkward in his own home. "You must be tired too. Your room is ready upstairs, first door on the left." "And yours?" Eleanor asked, needing to understand the geography of this new life. "End of the hall." He hesitated. "As I said before, this is a marriage in name only, for Timothy's sake. I don't expect—" "I understand," Eleanor assured him quickly. "The arrangement is clear." Relief flickered across his features. "Good, that's good." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen. "There's food if you're hungry. Coffee on the stove." "Thank you, but I think I'll retire as well." Eleanor paused, uncertain how to navigate this strange new relationship. "Good night, Mr. Harden." "Matthew," he corrected. "Seems odd for a wife to call her husband Mr. Harden." "Matthew," she amended, "and you should call me Eleanor." He nodded, though the name seemed to stick in his throat. "Eleanor, good night." In her room, a space larger than she'd expected, with a comfortable bed, chest of drawers, and small desk beneath the window, Eleanor found her few possessions already unpacked. Her habit and wimple hung in the small closet, a reminder of the life she had left behind. Beside them hung several dresses she didn't recognize, simple but well-made garments in practical colors. On the bed lay a nightgown and robe, likewise unfamiliar. A note in Charlotte's handwriting explained, "These belong to my sister. Similar size to you. Every woman needs proper clothes." The thoughtfulness of the gesture brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the day's events. In the space of hours, she had gone from dedicated sister to married woman, from teacher to mother, from independence to a complex web of new relationships and responsibilities. She reached for her rosary, seeking comfort in the familiar ritual of prayer. But as her fingers moved over the beads, she found herself praying not just for guidance, but for the sleeping boy down the hall, for the taciturn man who was now her husband, and for the strength to become what they both needed. When she finally lay down to sleep, still fully dressed atop the covers, exhaustion claimed her instantly. Her last conscious thought was a question that would echo through the months to come. What have I done? Eleanor woke to the sound of quiet activity downstairs. For a moment she was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her sleep-addled mind. Then memory rushed back: Sarah's death, the hasty marriage, Timothy's grief, the journey to what was now her home. Sunlight streamed through the window, suggesting she had slept later than usual. She rose quickly, smoothing her rumpled clothing as best she could. After a brief internal debate, she chose one of the dresses Charlotte had provided, a serviceable navy blue with a high collar and simple lines. It felt strange to dress in secular clothing after so many years in her habit, like donning a costume for a role she wasn't sure how to play. Downstairs, she found Matthew at the stove, cooking what appeared to be breakfast. Timothy sat at the table watching silently. "Good morning," Eleanor said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Both males looked up equally uncertain in their response. Matthew nodded, spatula in hand. "Morning." "Coffee's hot." Timothy said nothing, his eyes red-rimmed from crying. Eleanor moved to him first, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Did you sleep well?" she asked, knowing the question was inadequate, but needing to establish some normalcy. The boy shrugged. "Had dreams about Mama." Eleanor sat beside him. "That's natural. Your mother loved you very much. Said you and Mr. Harden would take care of me now." He looked up at her, his eyes searching her face. "But you're a nun. Nuns don't get married or have children." The directness of his observation caught Eleanor off guard. "That's usually true," she acknowledged, "but sometimes God calls us to unexpected paths. I believe he led me here to help you and Matthew." Timothy considered this. "So God wanted you to stop being a nun." From the stove, Matthew made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh or a cough. Eleanor shot him a look before turning back to Timothy. "I believe God wanted me to be where I could do the most good," she said carefully, "and right now that's here with you." This seemed to satisfy the boy, who nodded and returned his attention to the table. Matthew brought plates of eggs and bacon, setting them down with an awkward formality. "Not fancy," he said, "but it's hot." They ate in silence, three strangers bound by circumstance rather than choice, each navigating their new reality in their own way. Eleanor noticed that Matthew ate efficiently, without apparent enjoyment, while Timothy merely pushed his food around his plate. "You need to eat, Timothy," she encouraged, "to keep up your strength." "Not hungry," he mumbled. Matthew set down his fork. "I understand, son," he said, his voice gentler than Eleanor had heard it before. "When my mother died, I couldn't eat for days, but it doesn't honor Sarah for you to waste away. She'd want you strong." Timothy looked up at him, a flash of connection passing between them, shared understanding of loss. Without further protest, the boy began to eat each bite clearly, an effort of will rather than appetite. After breakfast, Matthew outlined the day's plans. "Need to check the stock, make sure everything weathered the storm. Timothy, you can help if you'd like." The boy nodded eagerly, seemingly grateful for the distraction. Matthew turned to Eleanor, clearly uncertain what to propose for her. "I should familiarize myself with the house," she said, filling the awkward silence. "Learn where things are kept." "Of course." Matthew seemed relieved by her practicality. "There's a list of supplies in the pantry. If you note what we need, I can fetch it from town later in the week." With that settled, the males bundled up and headed to the barn, leaving Eleanor alone in what was now her home. She stood in the kitchen, taking stock of her surroundings with a teacher's methodical eye. The house was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's residence. The kitchen contained not just the necessities, but conveniences many frontier homes lacked: a proper stove rather than just a fireplace. Shelves stocked with staples, even a small collection of cookbooks. The main room held comfortable furniture, bookshelves filled with volumes ranging from practical manuals to classics of literature, and touches that spoke of permanence rather than temporary accommodation. Moving through the downstairs rooms, Eleanor found evidence of a man who valued comfort and order. Each space was clean, organized, and furnished with pieces that, while not extravagant, showed quality and care. It was not the home of someone who lived hand to mouth, nor of someone who viewed his residence as merely a place to sleep between workdays. Upstairs, besides the bedrooms she had already seen, she discovered a small study containing a desk, more books, and a window offering a commanding view of the surrounding landscape. On the desk sat a Bible, its leather cover worn from use despite Matthew's professed loss of faith. Curious, Eleanor opened it, finding the flyleaf inscribed, "To Michael on the occasion of his ordination. May you lead others to the light as you have been led. With pride and love, Father." The name gave her pause. Michael, not Matthew. Another piece of the puzzle that was her new husband. She was about to close the Bible when a folded paper slipped from between its pages. Setting the book down, Eleanor unfolded what appeared to be a letter yellowed with age and creased from repeated handling. The handwriting was masculine but elegant, the ink faded in places. "My dearest Emily," it began, and Eleanor's heart stopped. Emily, her name before she became Sister Eleanor Grace. The name only her family and closest friends had used. Her eyes raced down the page, disbelief mounting with each word. If you're reading this, I pray it means you've forgiven my abrupt departure. I cannot adequately explain what drove me away on the eve of what should have been our happiest day, except to say that forces beyond my control made it impossible for me to keep my promise to you. Know that leaving you was the greatest agony of my life. Not a day passes that I don't remember your smile, your kindness, your unwavering faith. I have carried you in my heart through dark times, holding on to the hope that someday, God willing, I might find my way back to you. If any spark of affection for me remains in your heart, meet me at Old North Church on May 1st. I will wait all day, praying for your appearance, though I scarcely deserve such grace. With enduring love, in deepest regret. Michael. Eleanor sank into the desk chair, the letter trembling in her hands. Michael. Matthew, the former minister from Boston who had fled west after tragedy. The man whose abandonment had driven her to the convent. Matthew Harden was Michael Harrington, the fiancé who had broken her heart 10 years ago. And now, by some cosmic jest or divine plan, he was her husband. The sound of boots on the porch roused her from her shock. Hastily, she refolded the letter and slipped it back into the Bible, her mind racing. Should she confront him immediately, or take time to process this extraordinary revelation? Before she could decide, the door opened, admitting Matthew and Timothy, their cheeks ruddy from the cold. Stocks all accounted for. Matthew reported helping Timothy out of his coat. This one's a natural with horses. Timothy managed a small smile at the praise the first Eleanor had seen since Sarah's death. The bay mare let me brush her, he said. Mr. Harden says she doesn't usually like strangers. Good judge of character, that mare, Matthew said, hanging up their coats. He glanced at Eleanor, his expression shifting to concern. You all right? You look pale. Eleanor forced herself to nod. Just a bit overwhelmed, she said, which was certainly true, if not the whole truth. It's been quite a change. Matthew's face softened with understanding. For all of us, he agreed. Take your time. No rush to figure everything out at once. If only he knew the magnitude of what she was trying to figure out. Eleanor looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since her discovery. Now that she knew what to look for, she could see traces of Michael Harrington and Matthew Harden. The same thoughtful brow, the same way of tilting his head when listening, the same hands that had once held hers with such reverence. How had she not recognized him immediately? 10 years had changed them both, certainly. The young idealistic minister was now a weathered rancher. The sheltered Boston debutante now a woman tempered by faith and service. But still to not recognize the man she had once promised to marry. I thought I might make soup for lunch, she said, desperate for normality in the face of this revelation. If that sounds agreeable. Anything's fine, Matthew assured her. Timothy and I need to check the fences on the north pasture. Might be gone a couple hours. Timothy looked between them, sensing the undercurrents but unable to interpret them. Can I ride my own horse? He asked Matthew. Not today. We'll double up on Thunder. Maybe this spring we'll find you a pony of your own. The casual promise of a future this spring implying permanence and continuity seemed to reassure Timothy more than any words of comfort could have. He nodded, satisfied with this evidence that his new life would contain good things alongside the grief. After they departed again, Eleanor moved through the house in a daze, mechanically gathering ingredients for soup, while her mind grappled with her discovery. Michael Harrington, the man whose abandonment had altered the course of her life, was now Matthew Harden, the man to whom she was legally and morally bound. Did he know who she was? Had he recognized her when she first arrived in Red Fern Ridge? The letter suggested he had tried to find her years ago, but how could he not know his own former fiancée? Then again, she hadn't recognized him either, and she had changed her name, cut her hair, spent a decade behind convent walls. Perhaps it wasn't so impossible that they had become strangers to each other. As she chopped vegetables and stirred the pot, Eleanor wrestled with her next move. Confrontation seemed the most direct approach, yet something held her back. Matthew Michael clearly carried his own burdens of guilt and regret. And Timothy, fragile in his new grief, needed stability, not additional upheaval. Perhaps she reasoned it was better to wait, to observe and understand before revealing what she knew. After all, they were bound together now, not just by a hasty civil ceremony, but by their shared commitment to a child who had lost everything. The soup was simmering when Matthew and Timothy returned, bringing with them the crisp scent of winter moss air and male exertion. Timothy looked more animated than before, his cheeks flushed from the ride and his eyes brighter. Smells good, Matthew said appreciatively, helping Timothy out of his outdoor gear. Been a while since this kitchen saw proper cooking. It's just soup, Eleanor demurred, watching him surreptitiously for any sign of recognition, any hint that he knew her true identity. But Matthew's face remained open and unguarded, showing nothing but the awkward courtesy of a man trying to make his unexpected bride feel welcome. Either he was an exceptional actor, or he truly did not recognize the woman he had once intended to marry. They ate lunch at the kitchen table, the silence more comfortable than at breakfast. Timothy, exhausted by the morning's activities and the emotional toll of recent days, began to nod over his bowl. Someone needs a nap, Eleanor observed gently. For once, the boy didn't protest, merely nodding in sleepy agreement. Eleanor led him upstairs, helped him remove his boots, and tucked him into bed. He was asleep almost instantly, the combination of fresh air, physical activity, and grief pulling him into deep slumber. When she returned downstairs, she found Matthew at the sink, washing the dishes. Another surprise from a man she might have expected to leave domestic tasks to his new wife. "You don't have to do that," she said, moving to take over. "Been managing on my own a long time," he replied, though he stepped aside to let her finish. "Don't expect you to suddenly handle everything." Eleanor appreciated the consideration, even as it added another layer to her confusion. This thoughtful, capable man seemed at odds with the one who had abandoned her without explanation a decade ago. "Matthew," she began carefully, "may I ask you something personal?" He tensed slightly but nodded. "Seems fair given the circumstances." "You mentioned you were a minister once in Boston. What made you leave that life behind?" The question was deliberately general, giving him the opportunity to reveal as much or as little as he chose. Matthew was silent for a long moment, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "There was a fire," he said finally, his voice low, "at my church during an evening service. 7 people died, including 2 children." He swallowed hard. "I was the one who left a candle burning near the curtains while I focused on my sermon. My carelessness cost lives." Eleanor's heart constricted at the pain evident in his voice. "It was an accident," she said softly. "An accident born of negligence," he corrected. "I was so caught up in my own words, my own importance, that I failed to notice the danger until it was too late." His hands clenched on the edge of the sink. "Afterward, I couldn't face my congregation. Couldn't face Guam. So I ran, changed my name, came west, and left everyone behind," Eleanor said, unable to keep a hint of personal hurt from her voice. "Everyone who cared about you." Matthew turned to her, a flicker of something recognition, suspicion crossing his face. "Yes," he admitted, "including a woman I was to marry. The coward's way out running instead of facing the consequences." Eleanor held his gaze. "Did you ever try to contact her to explain?" He looked away, guilt evident in his posture. "Once, years later, I wrote to her, asked to meet." A bitter smile crossed his face. "She never came. Can't blame her. Why would she after what I did?" The revelation struck Eleanor like a physical blow. He had written, he had waited. But by then she had been Sister Eleanor Grace, secluded behind convent walls, the letter never reaching her. "Perhaps she never received your message," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Matthew shrugged the gesture, conveying years of resignation. "Doesn't matter now. Water long under the bridge." He straightened visibly, putting the painful subject aside. "I need to check the mail. Storms likely delayed the post." With that, he was gone, the door closing behind him with quiet finality. Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen, heart racing with the implications of what she had learned. Michael Matthew had not simply abandoned her on a cruel whim, but out of guilt and shame following a tragic accident. He had tried to find her to explain, but fate had kept them apart. Until now. A gunshot echoed through the darkness of the western night. Eleanor Grace, a woman in a simple dress, stood trembling with a rifle in her hands, smoke still rising from its barrel. Before her, a man fell to the ground, blood spreading across the white snow. Behind her, Matthew Harden, the husband she had married just months ago, held a child in his arms, his eyes filled with astonishment. "My father was right about you," the wounded man whispered. "Even angels can become demons." But that moment, the gunshot, the blood on snow, the wounded man still lay in their future. In the days following Sarah's death, Eleanor, Matthew, and Timothy settled into an uneasy rhythm, 3 strangers building a life from the broken pieces of their separate pasts. Eleanor kept her discovery to herself, watching Matthew for any sign that he recognized her as his former fiancée. But if he harbored any suspicion about her true identity, he showed no indication. He remained unfailingly polite, considerate, and distant, a man honoring the terms of their arrangement without crossing the invisible boundaries between them. Timothy drifted through those first days in the fog of grief, his small face solemn, his eyes rarely meeting theirs. At night, Eleanor would hear him crying softly in his room, and though she would sit with him stroking his hair until he fell asleep again, she knew that no comfort could fill the void his mother's death had left. A week after their hasty marriage, Charlotte Webb arrived at the ranch bringing mail that had accumulated during the storms. "The path to Cheyenne is finally clear," she reported, stamping snow from her boots in the entryway. "Judge Parker filed your marriage certificate and guardianship papers." She handed a thick envelope to Eleanor. "And this came for you from Pennsylvania." Eleanor recognized the handwriting of her mother's superior. She tucked the letter away, not ready to face the judgment or disappointment it might contain. Charlotte studied her with a doctor's shrewd eye. "How are you adjusting, Mrs. Harden?" The name still startled Eleanor. "As well as can be expected, I suppose. It's a significant change." And Timothy, grieving, quiet, but he seems to find comfort in the routine of ranch life. Charlotte nodded, satisfied. Children are remarkably resilient given time and stability. She glanced toward the kitchen where Matthew was preparing coffee. "And your husband? How is that arrangement progressing?" The question, though gently asked, made Eleanor flush. "Mr. Harden has been a perfect gentleman," she said stiffly. "Our arrangement is working as agreed." A knowing smile crossed Charlotte's face. "I see." She lowered her voice. "You know, Eleanor, marriages that begin as practical arrangements often develop into something more genuine, especially when both parties are as principled and caring as you and Matthew." "Dr. Webb." "Charlotte, please." "Charlotte," Eleanor amended. "Our situation is unique. Mr. Harden and I barely know each other." "Then perhaps you should remedy that," the doctor suggested, "for Timothy's sake, if nothing else. The boy needs to see genuine affection between his guardians, not just polite coexistence." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Matthew joined them carrying mugs of steaming coffee. "Mail come through?" he asked Charlotte. "Finally, Judge Parker sends his regards. Said he's never performed a more unusual ceremony, but he's confident he made the right decision for the boy." Matthew nodded, handing Eleanor a mug. His fingers brushed hers in the exchange, a brief, accidental contact that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through her. "Speaking of Timothy," Charlotte continued, "I brought something for him." She produced a small wooden horse from her bag. "Carved by my father. Thought it might bring some comfort." "That's very kind," Eleanor said. "He's in the barn with the horses. They seem to calm him." "I'll take it to him," Matthew offered, setting down his coffee. "He's been asking when you'd visit Charlotte. Says you promised to tell him more about his mother when she was younger." After Matthew departed, Charlotte turned to Eleanor with a more serious expression. "How much do you know about Matthew's past?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. "He was a minister in Boston. There was a fire at his church. People died." Charlotte nodded. "Did he tell you he changed his name when he came west?" "Yes." Eleanor admitted, heart quickening, though not what it was before. "Michael Harrington," Charlotte supplied, confirming what Eleanor already knew. "He was engaged to be married. Left his fiancée without explanation after the fire." Eleanor fought to keep her expression neutral. "He mentioned leaving someone behind." "The guilt nearly destroyed him," Charlotte said quietly. "Not just for those who died in the fire, but for the woman he abandoned. He tried to find her years later, but she had vanished, entered a convent, he believed." The pieces clicked into place. Charlotte knew. Somehow the doctor had figured out the impossible connection between Eleanor and Matthew. "How did you know?" Eleanor asked, abandoning the pretense. Charlotte's smile was gentle. "Sarah told me. She recognized you the moment you arrived in Red Fern Ridge, said she'd seen your photograph in Matthew's Bible years ago. She believed your appearance was divine providence." Eleanor sank into a chair, stunned by this revelation. "Sarah engineered this, all of it." "She was dying," Charlotte said simply. "Wanted to secure Timothy's future, yes. But she also believed you and Matthew deserved a second chance, that the love you once shared could be rekindled." "He doesn't recognize me," Eleanor pointed out, "and I'm not the same woman I was 10 years ago." Nor is he the same man, Charlotte countered, but the qualities that drew you together, then compassion, faith, integrity, those remain. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Give it time, Eleanor. You've both suffered, both lost your way. Perhaps together you can find it again. The sound of boots on the porch announced Matthew's return with Timothy. The boy clutched the wooden horse, a small smile brightening his solemn face. Thank you for the horse, Dr. Webb, he said politely. It looks like thunder. You're very welcome, Charlotte replied, ruffling his hair. And I believe I promised you stories about your mother. While Charlotte entertained Timothy with tales of Sarah's younger days, Matthew drew Eleanor aside. Letter came for me, too, he said quietly, showing her an official-looking envelope. From the school board. They're asking when you'll resume teaching. Town's wondering if you've abandoned them. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. In the chaos of recent events, she had given little thought to her duties as Red Fern Ridge's teacher. What did you tell him? Nothing yet. Figured that was your decision to make. His expression was carefully neutral. If you want to return to teaching, we can work something out. Timothy could come with you to town on school days. The consideration touched her. Thank you, I would like to continue if possible. Perhaps after another week to give Timothy more time to settle. Matthew nodded, relief evident in his posture. Good. That's good. I'll let them know. This simple exchange, practical, thoughtful, focused on Timothy's welfare, exemplified their interactions since the hasty wedding. Always polite, always considerate, always maintaining a careful distance. Yet in light of Charlotte's revelations, Eleanor found herself studying Matthew with new eyes, searching for traces of the passionate young minister she had once loved. They were there, she realized, beneath the weathered exterior and guarded demeanor. The same thoughtfulness, the same quiet strength, the same capacity for devotion, now directed toward a motherless boy rather than a congregation or fiancé. After Charlotte departed, promising to return the following week, Eleanor finally opened the letter from her mother superior. She read it alone in her room, bracing for condemnation, but finding instead a measured understanding. While your actions were precipitous and your communication lacking, Mother Mary Catherine wrote, I cannot in good conscience condemn a choice made out of compassion for a child and respect for a dying woman's wishes. Your vows were temporary. Your commitment to God's service need not be confined to convent walls. Serve him well in your new vocation as wife and mother's sister, or rather Mrs. Harden. You remain in our prayers. The letter concluded with practical matters, arrangement runs for her few possessions at the convent, paperwork regarding her formal release from vows, blessings for her new life. No judgment, no recrimination, just acceptance of a path not chosen, but thrust upon her by circumstance and compassion. That evening, as Matthew read to Timothy before bed a nightly ritual they had established, Eleanor listened from the doorway, hearing in his gentle voice echoes of the young minister who had once captivated her with his sermons. When Timothy fell asleep, Matthew carefully marked their place in Robinson Crusoe and tucked the blankets around the boy's shoulders. He's exhausted, Matthew whispered as they moved into the hallway. Worked hard with the horses today. It's good for him to stay busy, Eleanor agreed. Gives him less time to dwell on his loss. They descended to the main room where the fire had burned low. Matthew added logs, coaxing the flames back to life, while Eleanor settled in the chair opposite. Charlotte says the worst of winter is behind us, she remarked, searching for neutral conversation. Spring comes early to this part of Wyoming. Matthew nodded, still focused on the fire. Another month of cold, then thaw. Busy time on a ranch, calving, planting, repairs. Winter put off. An awkward silence fell between them, filled only by the crackling of the newly invigorated flames. Eleanor gathered her courage, deciding it was time to bridge the distance between them, if only for Timothy's sake. Matthew, she began carefully, I think we should discuss our situation. For Timothy's benefit, we should present a more united front, a more natural family environment. He looked up, surprised by her directness. What did you have in mind? Nothing improper, she assured him quickly. Just less formality between us, more open communication, perhaps shared activities beyond the necessary household management. Matthew studied her, his expression unreadable in the firelight. You think Timothy needs to see us as a real family, not just guardians who happen to share a house. Precisely, Eleanor confirmed, relieved at his understanding. Children are perceptive. He'll sense the awkwardness between us if it continues. Matthew was silent for a long moment, considering her proposal. You're right, he finally conceded. Been so focused on giving you space, respecting the arrangement, I didn't think how it might look to him. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that struck Eleanor with its familiarity. So, more like friends than partners in raising him? Yes, Eleanor agreed. Friends would be a good start. A start, he repeated, something indefinable flickering in his eyes. All right then, Eleanor. Friends it is. He extended his hand across the space between them, a formal gesture at odds with the informal relationship they were proposing. Eleanor took it, feeling the same calluses that had brushed her fingers when he'd slipped the wedding ring onto her hand. Friends, she echoed, and for the first time since their hasty marriage, she felt a genuine connection forming between them, tentative, cautious, but real. The following weeks brought gradual changes to the Harden household. Eleanor resumed teaching at the Red Fern Ridge Schoolhouse 3 days a week with Timothy accompanying her. The boy seemed to benefit from both the routine and the interaction with other children, though he remained quieter than before his mother's death. On days when Eleanor taught, Matthew would bring them to town in the morning and collect them in the afternoon, occasionally staying to help with repairs to the schoolhouse or to discuss town business with Mayor Collins. The three would return to the ranch together, presenting to the community the image of a family finding its way after tragedy. At home, the awkward formality between Eleanor and Matthew slowly gave way to a more comfortable coexistence. They established routines and divided responsibilities, consulting each other on decisions regarding Timothy and the household. In the evenings, they would sit together in the main room, Matthew carving or reading, Eleanor sewing or preparing lessons, Timothy drawing or playing with small wooden animals Matthew had crafted for him. To outside observers, they might have appeared a conventional family, but Eleanor was acutely aware of the unspoken truths that hung between them, her knowledge of Matthew's true identity, his ignorance of hers, the circumstances that had brought them together, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. As winter grudgingly gave way to early spring, bringing longer days and the first tentative bird song, Eleanor found herself watching Matthew with increasing curiosity. The more time they spent together, the more glimpses she caught of the man she had once known, in his dry humor, in his thoughtful observations, in the way his voice softened when he spoke of matters close to his heart. Yet he remained in many ways a mystery. Though they spoke freely of Timothy, of the ranch, of the changing seasons, Matthew rarely mentioned his past or his abandoned faith. The Bible she had discovered in his study remained untouched, at least in her presence. Then came an unseasonably warm day in early April, when the snow had receded enough to reveal patches of earth and the promise of new growth. Timothy was visiting Charlotte in town, giving Eleanor and Matthew a rare day alone together at the ranch. Eleanor had seized the opportunity to air out the house, throwing open windows and beating rugs on the porch railing. Matthew was replacing shingles damaged during winter storms, working steadily on the roof, while Eleanor moved around the yard below. "Careful with that rug," he called down, amusement in his voice. "You're creating a dust storm." Eleanor looked up, shading her eyes against the bright spring sunlight. Perhaps if someone had beaten these rugs more regularly over the winter, there wouldn't be quite so much dust, she retorted, though her tone was light. Matthew grinned, a rare and guarded expression that transformed his face. "Mea culpa, Mrs. Harden. I confess to many bachelor shortcomings." The Latin phrase, "my fault," slipped so naturally from his lips, a remnant of his seminary education. Eleanor felt a pang of recognition, remembering how the young Michael Harrington had often used such phrases in their private conversations, delighting in sharing his knowledge with her. "Your Latin pronunciation was always excellent," she said without thinking. Matthew stilled, hammer poised mid-strike. "What did you say?" Eleanor froze, realizing her mistake. She'd revealed knowledge she shouldn't possess, not as Eleanor Grace, former Benedictine sister, but only as Emily Sutton, former fiancée of Michael Harrington. I simply meant that you speak it well," she stammered, trying to recover. "For a rancher." Matthew was climbing down the ladder now, his movements deliberate, his eyes never leaving her face. "How would you know my Latin was always good? We've never discussed it before." Eleanor backed away as he approached, the beating stick still clutched in her hands like a shield. "I must have misspoken. The sun is quite warm today." "Emily." The name hung in the air between them, a question and an accusation. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, her carefully constructed identity crumbling under the weight of that single word. Emily Sutton. Matthew repeated, his voice rough with disbelief. It's you, isn't it? For a moment, Eleanor considered denial, claiming confusion, misunderstanding, coincidence. But as she met Matthew's stunned gaze, she knew the time for secrets had passed. Yes, she admitted softly, though I haven't used that name in 10 years. Matthew staggered back as if struck, collapsing onto the porch steps. How long have you known, he demanded. How long have you known who I am? Since that first day at the ranch, Eleanor confessed. I found the letter you wrote me in your Bible, the one asking me to meet you at Old North Church. 6 months, Matthew said, incredulity and hurt mingling in his voice. You've known for 6 months and said nothing. You didn't recognize me either, Eleanor pointed out, defensive in the face of his accusation. Not when I arrived in Red Fern Ridge, not during the storm, not even when you married me. Because you were a nun, Matthew exclaimed. Because your hair was hidden. Because you called yourself Eleanor Grace. Because it had been 10 years. Because, he trailed off, running a hand over his face. Because I never imagined I'd see you again, let alone here. Eleanor set down the beating stick and moved closer, though still maintaining a careful distance. I wasn't sure at first, she said. And then after Sarah died and Timothy needed stability, it didn't seem the right time to bring up the past. Matthew looked up at her, his expression a complex mixture of emotions she couldn't fully decipher. Sarah, he said suddenly. Sarah knew, didn't she? That's why she pushed for the marriage, not just for Timothy, but because she knew who we were to each other. Eleanor nodded. Charlotte told me. Sarah recognized me from a photograph you kept. All this time, Matthew murmured more to himself than to her. Everyone scheming, arranging while we remained blind. He laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Or half blind in your case. I'm sorry, while Eleanor said the words inadequate but necessary. I should have told you when I first realized. Why didn't you? The simple question demanded an honest answer. Eleanor took a deep breath, searching for the truth beneath the justifications she had offered herself over the months. I was afraid, she admitted finally. Afraid of your reaction, afraid of what it might mean for Timothy, afraid of... She hesitated, then pushed forward. Afraid of feeling again what I had worked so hard to bury when you left me. Matthew flinched at the rawness in her voice. I never wanted to hurt you, Emily Eleanor, whoever you are now. I'm both, she said quietly. Emily Sutton still exists within Eleanor Grace, and now within Eleanor Harden as well. All the women I've been are part of who I am. Matthew stood pacing the small porch as he processed this revelation. The fire, he said abruptly. Did you know about the fire when you came to Red Fern Ridge? No, Eleanor assured him. I knew only that you had left without explanation. The letter you sent to me never arrived. I was already at the convent by then. 7 people died because of my carelessness, Matthew said, his voice hollow. 2 children, a young mother, an elderly deacon who had mentored me since seminary. His hands clenched at his sides. I couldn't face anyone afterward, least of all you. How could I ask you to marry a man responsible for such tragedy? Eleanor moved closer, close enough now to see the pain etched in every line of his face. It was an accident, Michael, she said softly, using his original name. A terrible accident, but not a sin. I was supposed to be their shepherd, he insisted, their protector. Instead, my negligence led them to slaughter. And you've punished yourself ever since, Eleanor observed. Changed your name, abandoned your calling, isolated yourself in the wilderness. Matthew's laugh was bitter. Not isolated enough, apparently. God has a strange sense of humor bringing you here of all places. Perhaps it wasn't humor but mercy, Eleanor suggested. A chance for healing for both of us. Matthew looked at her directly, then really looked at her as if seeing past Sister Eleanor, Grace past Mrs. Harden, to the woman he had once planned to marry. You became a nun because of me, he said, realization dawning. Because I left. Eleanor couldn't deny it. I was heartbroken, she acknowledged. The convent offered sanctuary when the world seemed too painful to bear. I'm sorry, Ma. Matthew said, the words emerging as if torn from him. So damn sorry, Emily, for leaving, for not explaining, for everything you suffered because of my cowardice. The raw emotion in his voice broke something open inside Eleanor, a dam holding back 10 years of hurt and confusion. Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth? She demanded, her own voice rising. Did you think I would condemn you, that I couldn't understand an accident, however tragic? I couldn't face your disappointment, Matthew admitted. Your father was right about me all along. I wasn't worthy of you. My father, Eleanor echoed, confused. What does he have to do with this? Matthew stared at her. You don't know? Know what? Your father came to me the night before the fire. Matthew explained, his voice tight with old anger. Offered me money to leave Boston to break our engagement. Said no daughter of Judge Jeremiah Sutton would marry a penniless preacher with delusions of grandeur. Eleanor felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. My father tried to bribe you, and you never told me. I refused him, Matthew continued. Told him I loved you and wouldn't be bought off. He threatened to ruin me, to use his influence to destroy my reputation, my career, everything I'd worked for. His expression darkened. The next night, the fire happened, and suddenly he didn't need to ruin me. I'd done it myself. You thought he might have... Eleanor couldn't complete the terrible thought. Cause the fire, no. That was my carelessness, no one else's. Matthew shook his head. But his visit, his threats, they were in my mind during that sermon. I was distracted, angry, not paying attention as I should have been. He met her gaze directly, and afterward, with the deaths on my conscience, his words seemed prophetic. I wasn't worthy of you. I never had been. Eleanor's mind reeled with these revelations. Her father, the respected Judge Sutton Pillar of Boston society, had attempted to sabotage her happiness through threats and bribery. And Michael, rather than confiding in her, had carried the weight of both the tragedy and her father's manipulation alone. You should have told me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, about my father, about all of it. Would it have changed anything? Matthew asked. Would you have chosen a disgraced minister with blood on his hands over your family, your position, everything you'd known? Yes, Eleanor said without hesitation. I would have chosen you. I loved you, Michael. More than family, more than position, more than anything except God himself. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, a truth from the past that somehow retained its power in the present. Matthew's expression softened, decades of guilt and regret, momentarily eclipsed by wonder. You would have stood by me even then. Even then, Eleanor confirmed, as I would have stood by you after the fire had you given me the chance. Matthew turned away, overwhelmed by what might have been. We can't go back, he said, more to himself than to her. Can't undo what's done. No, Eleanor agreed, but perhaps we can move forward with honesty rather than secrets between us. He faced her again, his expression grave. Where does this leave us now, our marriage, Timothy? This life we've been building? It was the question Eleanor had been asking herself since discovering his identity. What did it mean that fate or God or simple coincidence had brought them together again after all these years? What future could they build on a foundation of old wounds and new responsibilities? I don't know, she admitted, but I think for Timothy's sake, if nothing else, we should try to find out. Matthew nodded slowly. For Timothy, he echoed, though something in his eyes suggested there might be other reasons worth exploring. We'll need time to process, to adjust. Time we have, Eleanor said, and truth now, perhaps that's enough to begin with. The tension between them gradually eased, replaced by a fragile understanding. They were no longer strangers playing at marriage, nor were they the young lovers they had once been. They were something new, survivors of separate sorrows, guardians of a child, not their own partners, in an unexpected journey. As they stood together on the porch, the spring sun warming their faces, Eleanor felt the first tentative stirrings of hope. Not for an immediate restoration of what they had lost, but for the possibility of something new growing from the ashes of the past. The sound of a wagon approaching broke the moment. They turned to see Charlotte returning with Timothy, the boy, waving excitedly from the seat beside her. Look what Dr. Webb got, he called as the wagon drew closer. A real fishing pole. Matthew and Eleanor exchanged a glance, silently agreeing to set aside their revelations for now. Timothy's happiness took precedence over their complicated past. That's wonderful, Eleanor called back, summoning a smile. Perhaps Mr. Harden can take you to the creek tomorrow. We'll all go, Matthew suggested, surprising her. Make a day of it. Family outing. The word family carried new weight now, laden with both possibility and uncertainty. But as Timothy's face lit up with genuine excitement, the first pure joy they'd seen from him since Sarah's death, Eleanor knew they would find their way forward, one careful step at a time. News traveled fast in Redfern Ridge. By the time Eleanor returned to teaching the following week, the entire town seemed aware that something had shifted between her and Matthew. Speculation ran rampant. Had they finally consummated their hasty marriage? Were they expecting a child? Had they quarreled? Eleanor met the curious looks and whispered conversations with dignity, neither confirming nor denying the rumors. The truth that she and Matthew were rediscovering each other after a decade of separation and misunderstanding was too complex for town gossip. In private, they circled each other, cautiously relearning the people they had become during their years apart. Sometimes Eleanor would catch glimpses of the young minister she had loved in Matthew's dry wit and his thoughtful observations and the gentleness he showed Timothy. Other times he seemed a stranger, hardened by guilt and isolation, skeptical, where he had once been faithful, reserved, where he had once been passionate. For his part, Matthew watched Eleanor with new awareness, noticing the ways she had both changed and remained the same. The sheltered Boston debutante had become a woman of substance and determination. Yet her core qualities, compassion, intelligence, quiet strength, remained unchanged. They spoke often of the past, now filling in the decade-long gap in their knowledge of each other. Eleanor told Matthew of her years at the convent, of finding purpose in prayer and teaching. Matthew described his journey west, his struggle to build a new life free from the shadow of tragedy, his gradual healing through honest work, in Wyoming's harsh beauty. Only one subject remained largely untouched: their feelings for each other in the present. What had once been youthful love had been transformed by time and trauma into something more complicated, neither fully extinguished nor easily rekindled. Timothy, sensitive to the shifting dynamics between his guardians, responded with cautious optimism. He began to seek out Eleanor more often, asking for help with his reading or showing her discoveries from his explorations of the ranch. And he watched Matthew with increasing admiration, trying to emulate his steady competence and quiet strength. "Are you and Mr. Harden going to be my real parents now?" he asked Eleanor one evening as she tucked him into bed. The question caught her off guard. "We're your guardians, Timothy. Your mother wanted us to care for you." "I know," the boy said, fidgeting with his blanket. "But Billy Peterson says guardians aren't the same as parents. Says I'm not really part of a family." Eleanor sat on the edge of his bed, choosing her words carefully. "Families come in many forms, Timothy. Some are formed by birth, others by choice. Mr. Harden and I chose to be your family when we promised your mother we would care for you." "But you don't love each other," Timothy said with a child's blunt perception. "Real parents love each other." The observation struck Eleanor speechless. How could she explain the complex history between her and Matthew, the old wounds and new possibilities to a 10-year-old boy? "Mr. Harden and I care deeply for each other," she said finally, "and we both love you very much. Isn't that what matters most in a family?" Timothy considered this, then nodded slowly. "I guess so." He yawned, eyelids growing heavy. "Night, Mrs. Harden." "Good night, Timothy." Eleanor smoothed his hair and adjusted his blankets. "Sleep well." She found Matthew in the main room repairing a bridle by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, concern crossing his face at her troubled expression. "Something wrong?" Eleanor sank into the chair opposite him. "Timothy just asked if we're going to be his real parents. Apparently Billy Peterson has been telling him guardians aren't the same as family." Matthew set aside his work, frowning. "That Peterson boy has a mean streak. Takes after his father." "It's not just Billy," Eleanor sighed. "Timothy senses the uncertainty between us. He said real parents love each other." Matthew was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the fire. "Smart boy," he said finally. "Sees more than we give him credit for." "What do we tell him?" Eleanor asked. "How do we explain what we ourselves don't fully understand?" "The truth," Matthew suggested, "as much of it as he can comprehend. That we care for each other, that we're figuring things out, that families come in different forms." "That's essentially what I told him," Eleanor admitted, "but I'm not sure it satisfied him." Matthew leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Emily, Eleanor." He still stumbled occasionally between her names. "What do you want from this marriage? Now that we know who we are to each other, now that the initial shock has passed." The directness of his question took her by surprise. They had been so careful with each other since his discovery of her identity, avoiding any discussion of their marriage beyond its practical aspects. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Part of me still feels like Sister Eleanor Grace, dedicated to God above all else. Part of me is Emily Sutton, who loved Michael Harrington with all the passion of youth. And part of me is becoming Eleanor Hardin Timothy's guardian, your wife in name, if not in fact. And which part is strongest? Matthew pressed. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. They're all me, Michael, all parts of who I am. I can't separate them neatly or choose between them. He nodded, accepting her complex answer. I'm not the man you knew in Boston, he said after a moment. That idealistic young minister died in the fire along with his parishioners. And I'm not the sheltered girl you proposed to, Eleanor countered. We've both been transformed by what we've lived through. Yet here we are, Matthew said softly, together again despite everything that should have kept us apart. Here we are, Eleanor echoed, feeling the weight of coincidence or providence that had brought them full circle. Matthew rose, moving to stand before the fire. I haven't believed in God's plan for a long time, he admitted. Couldn't reconcile a loving God with what happened in Boston. But lately, he turned to face her. Lately, I've wondered if there might be purpose in it all. In the fire, in our separation, and finding each other again here in Timothy. It was the closest he had come to discussing faith since their reunion. Eleanor felt a surge of hope at this small opening. I believe there is, she said. Not that God caused our suffering, but that he can create meaning from it if we're willing. Matthew studied her, the lamplight casting his features in golden shadow. You never lost your faith even after what I did to you. I questioned it, Eleanor admitted. Doubted, raged, bargained. But ultimately, faith was the only thing that made sense of the pain. The only light in the darkness. I envied that about you even back then, Matthew said. Your certainty, your trust. I was the minister, but your faith was always purer than mine. Not pure, Eleanor disagreed, just different. You questioned because you cared so deeply, because injustice and suffering wounded you so personally. Matthew shook his head, a sad smile touching his lips. You always saw the best in me even when I couldn't see it myself. I saw you, Eleanor said simply, the real you beneath the collar and sermons and expectations. Something shifted in Matthew's expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself. And now, what do you see now? Eleanor rose, moving to stand before him. I see a good man, she said quietly. Wounded, yes, changed certainly, but still fundamentally good. Still worthy of love. The word hung between them, freighted with meaning and memory. Matthew's breath caught his eyes searching hers. Emily, he whispered her old name, a caress. Michael, she answered, acknowledging who they had been to each other, who they might be again. He reached for her, then slowly giving her time to withdraw if she wished. But Eleanor remained still, heart racing as his hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing lightly across her skin. I never stopped loving you, he confessed, voice rough with emotion. Not in Boston, not on the journey west, not in all the years since. I tried. God knows I tried. But you were always there in my heart, in my dreams, in my regrets. Eleanor leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of it. I thought I had buried my love for you beneath prayers and service, she admitted. But it was always there waiting. Even when I didn't know who you were, something in me recognized you. Matthew's other hand came up, framing her face. Where do we go from here? He asked the question, both practical and profound. Forward, Eleanor answered. Together, one day at a time. Their first kiss in over a decade was gentle, tentative, a question rather than a demand. Eleanor felt it echo through her awakening emotions, long dormant, connecting past to present in a single heartbeat. When they parted, Matthew rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed as if in prayer. I don't deserve this second chance, he murmured. None of us deserves grace, Eleanor replied. That's what makes it grace. A small sound from the stairway broke the moment. They turned to find Timothy watching them, eyes wide in his small face. Timothy, Eleanor said, stepping back from Matthew, you should be in bed. I heard talking, the boy explained. Are you really the same people from before? Eleanor and Matthew exchanged surprised glances. You were listening, Matthew asked, his tone gentle rather than accusatory. Timothy nodded, unrepentant. Were you really going to get married a long time ago before you were my guardians? Eleanor sighed, beckoning the boy closer. Yes, Timothy. Mr. Hardin and I knew each other many years ago in Boston. We were engaged to be married, but we were separated by circumstances. And now you found each other again, Timothy clarified. Like in a story. Like in a story, Matthew agreed, a smile tugging at his lips. Though it's a bit more complicated than that. Timothy considered this, his young face serious. Does this mean you are going to be real parents now? Not just guardians? The question hung in the air, innocent yet profound. Eleanor looked to Matthew, uncertain how to respond. We're already a real family, Timothy, Matthew said, crouching to the boy's level. Have been since the day we brought you home. Whether you call us guardians or parents doesn't change that. But will you love each other? Timothy persisted. Like Mama said real families do. Matthew glanced up at Eleanor, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, giving him permission to speak for them both. We already do, Matthew told the boy. We loved each other long ago, and we're finding our way back to that love again. Timothy's face brightened with hope. So we'll be a real family forever. Forever, Eleanor promised, kneeling beside Matthew to face the child who had brought them together. The three of us, a real family. Timothy threw his arms around them both, his small body trembling with emotion. Eleanor felt Matthew's arm encircle her shoulders, drawing her into the embrace. The three of them connected in a moment of perfect understanding. Later, after they had tucked Timothy back into bed with renewed assurances of their commitment to him and each other, Eleanor and Matthew stood in the hallway between their separate rooms, the future unfolding before them like an unmarked trail. One day at a time, Matthew reminded her, echoing her earlier words. No rush, no pressure. Eleanor nodded, grateful for his patience, for the chance to rebuild what had been broken between them, gradually, thoughtfully. One day at a time, she agreed. Their goodnight kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a passion, and as Eleanor entered her room alone, she felt not disappointment, but anticipation. They had waited 10 years to find each other again. They could wait a little longer to fully reclaim what they had lost. Spring advanced across the Wyoming landscape, touching the ranch with new life. Calves wobbled on spindly legs beside their mothers. Wildflowers dotted the emerging grass, and the creek ran high with snowmelt from distant mountains. As the earth renewed itself, so too did the bonds between the inhabitants of the Hardin Ranch. Eleanor and Matthew moved toward each other with deliberate care, rediscovering their connection through shared work, quiet conversations, and increasingly frequent moments of physical affection, a touch, a kiss, an embrace. Timothy blossomed in the warmth of their growing love, his grief for Sarah gradually transforming into fond remembrance rather than raw pain. To the people of Red Fern Ridge, the change in the Hardins was obvious. The awkward formality that had marked their early marriage gave way to genuine companionship, and speculation about their relationship shifted from curious gossip to approving observation. Never seen Hardin smile so much, Mayor Collins remarked to Charlotte Webb, as they watched Matthew help Eleanor into the wagon after school one day, his hand lingering on hers longer than strictly necessary. Marriage agrees with him, contrary to all expectations. Charlotte merely smiled, keeping the full story of the Hardins' remarkable reunion to herself. Love has a way of finding its path, she said enigmatically. By late May, with summer approaching and the school term nearing its end, life at the ranch had settled into a pleasant rhythm. Eleanor divided her time between teaching, managing the household, and caring for Timothy, while Matthew worked the land and livestock, gradually including Timothy in age-appropriate ranch tasks. They still maintained separate bedrooms, a fact that raised eyebrows among the more traditional townspeople, but which suited their careful rebuilding of trust and intimacy. Each evening they would sit together after Timothy was asleep, talking of the past, the present, and increasingly the future. I've been thinking, Matthew said one such evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. The south pasture would be good for wheat. We could build a proper garden too near the house. Planning for next year already? Eleanor asked, smiling at his forward thinking. And the years after, Matthew confirmed. Timothy will need education beyond what Red Fern Ridge can provide. College eventually if he's inclined. You're thinking very long term, Eleanor observed, touched by his commitment to the boy's future. Matthew took her hand, his expression earnest. I'm thinking of our family's future. Yours, mine, Timothy's. The life we're building together. The simple declaration warmed Eleanor more than the spring evening. Our family, she repeated, savoring the words. I like the sound of that. So do I. Matthew hesitated, then reached into his pocket. I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He produced a small box, weathered with age. Eleanor's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a ring. Not the simple band he had placed on her finger during their hasty civil ceremony, but an elegant diamond solitaire she recognized instantly. "My engagement ring," she whispered. "From Boston." Matthew nodded. "I kept it. All these years. Couldn't bear to part with it even when I believed I'd never see you again." "How did you know it was me?" Eleanor asked. "That day when I mentioned your Latin." A smile touched Matthew's lips. "I didn't nod consciously, but something in me must have recognized you from the beginning. Why else would I have proposed our arrangement so readily? Why else would I have felt so drawn to you despite everything?" Eleanor considered this, remembering the inexplicable connection she had felt to him even before discovering his identity. "Perhaps our souls knew each other," she suggested, "even when our minds didn't." "Perhaps." Matthew took her left hand where his mother's simple band already rested. "Emily Eleanor Grace Sutton Hardin," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Once I asked you to marry me as a young minister with dreams of changing the world. Now I ask you again as a man who has known failure and redemption, who loves you not with youthful passion alone, but with the depth that comes from loss and recovery." He held the ring poised above her finger. "Will you marry me again? Not for Timothy's sake, not for legal necessity, but for love. Will you be my wife in truth as well as name?" Eleanor looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life they had begun to build together from the ashes of mutual heartbreak. The answer came without hesitation or doubt. "Yes," she said simply. "With all that I am, with all that I've been, I choose you, now and always." Matthew slipped the ring onto her finger where it nestled against the plain band he had given her months before. The diamond caught the last rays of the setting sun, throwing rainbow prisms across their joined hands. "I was thinking," Matthew said, his voice husky with emotion, "that we might renew our vows. A proper ceremony, this time in the church in town, with Timothy standing with us." "I'd like that," Eleanor agreed. "A new beginning, witnessed by those we care about." Matthew drew her close, his kiss a promise of all that lay ahead. As darkness fell around them, stars emerging in the vast Wyoming sky, Eleanor felt the pieces of her fragmented life finally coming together. Sister Eleanor Grace, Emily Sutton, and Eleanor Hardin merging into a whole woman, complex and complete. Their peaceful moment was shattered by the distant sound of an approaching rider moving fast despite the gathering darkness. Matthew straightened, instantly alert. "Stay here," he instructed, moving to the edge of the porch for a better view. The rider emerged from the shadows, a figure silhouetted against the darkening sky. As he drew closer, details became visible: the expensive clothes, a fine horse, a bearing that spoke of authority and privilege. "Who is it?" Eleanor asked, joining Matthew despite his caution. Matthew's expression hardened as the rider came into full view. "Trouble," he said grimly. The man reined in his horse before the porch dust rising around him. He was older, distinguished, with silver hair and a face that might have been handsome if not for the coldness in his eyes. Those eyes fixed on Eleanor with a mixture of shock and fury. "Emily," he said, his voice carrying the cultured accent of Boston society. "So it's true, you really are here." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face as she recognized the rider. "Father," she whispered. Judge Jeremiah Sutton dismounted, his movements precise despite his age. "When I received word that my daughter had abandoned her religious vows to marry a rancher in Wyoming territory, I could scarcely believe it." His gaze shifted to Matthew, hardening further. "But I never imagined you had fallen so far as to marry him." "Judge Sutton," Matthew acknowledged, his voice carefully neutral. "You're a long way from Boston." "And you're a long way from the gallows, Harrington," Sutton retorted. "Or do you call yourself something else these days?" "Hardin," Matthew supplied. "Matthew Hardin." "Ooh, how convenient," Sutton sneered. "A new name to hide your crimes." Eleanor stepped forward, placing herself slightly between the two men. "What crimes?" Michael was cleared of any wrongdoing in the fire. "It was a tragic accident." Sutton's laugh was cold. "Is that what he told you, that he was cleared?" "The investigation was never completed, my dear. Your husband fled Boston before authorities could determine whether the fire was truly accidental or the result of criminal negligence." "That's not true," Matthew protested, though doubt flickered in his eyes. "The initial investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing." "Initial findings are often revised upon further examination," Sutton said smoothly. But we'll never know, will we? Because you ran like the coward you are. Eleanor felt Matthew tense beside her. Why are you here, Father? She demanded. After 10 years of silence, why seek me out now? Sutton's expression softened marginally as he addressed his daughter. To bring you home, of course. Your mother is ill, Emily. She asked for you constantly. When I received word of your whereabouts, I knew I had to come personally. Mother is ill, Eleanor repeated, concern overriding her suspicion. How serious is it? Serious enough that I've traveled halfway across the continent to find you, Sutton replied grimly. She may not have much time left. The news struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Despite the years of separation, despite her father's manipulation, her mother had always been a gentle presence in her memory, kind, supportive, if ultimately unable to stand against her husband's stronger will. I'm sorry to hear that, she said sincerely, but why did you really come, Father? Not just to deliver news of Mother's illness, surely. Sutton's mask of paternal concern slipped, revealing the calculating judge beneath. To save you from this situation. He gestured dismissively at the ranch at Matthew. To bring you back to civilization before it's too late. Too late for what? Eleanor pressed. Too late to salvage your reputation, your position, your future, Sutton explained as if to a child. The convent might have been an unconventional choice, but it was at least respectable. This frontier farce of a marriage to a man who abandoned you, who might yet face charges for the deaths he caused, this cannot stand. Our marriage is legal and binding, Matthew stated firmly, and the statute of limitations on any charges related to the fire expired years ago. Sutton's smile was cold. Perhaps for negligence, but what about arson murder? Those crimes have no expiration date. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor felt sick at the implication at the depths to which her father would sink to separate her from Matthew. You know very well the fire was accidental, she said, her voice shaking with anger. You're simply trying to threaten us. Am I? Sutton raised an eyebrow. Several witnesses recalled seeing Harrington particularly agitated the night of the fire. Almost vengeful, one might say, as if he had a score to settle. That's a lie, Matthew growled, taking a step forward. Is it? Sutton countered. You were rather upset after our conversation the previous evening, as I recall, when I made it clear you weren't worthy of my daughter. Stop it, Eleanor demanded. Both of you. This serves no purpose. Sutton turned to her, his expression softening to one of paternal concern that she now recognized as entirely calculated. Emily, be reasonable. Your mother needs you. Your family needs you. Whatever attachment you feel to this man, to this place, it can't compare to your duty to those who truly love you. And what of my duty to my husband? Eleanor asked. To the child we're raising together. Sutton frowned. Child. What child? As if summoned by the question, the door opened behind them and Timothy appeared, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Mrs. Harden, I heard voices. Eleanor immediately moved to the boy, placing a protective arm around his shoulders. It's all right, Timothy. This is a visitor from back east. He was just leaving. Sutton studied Timothy with narrowed eyes. Your child, impossible given the timing. Our son in every way that matters, Matthew said firmly, joining Eleanor and Timothy to present a united front, which you would understand if you truly cared about family rather than appearances. Sutton's face hardened once more. I see, you've constructed quite the little fantasy here, haven't you? Playing house on the frontier, pretending to be respectable folk. He turned to Eleanor. I'll be staying in town for 3 days. That should give you time to pack your belongings and say your goodbyes. The train leaves for Cheyenne on Friday morning. I'm not going anywhere, Eleanor stated firmly. My place is here with my husband and our son. We shall see, Sutton replied, his tone ominous. We shall see. With that, he mounted his horse and rode toward town, leaving the small family standing together on the porch, the joy of their earlier moment thoroughly shattered. He can't force you to go, Matthew said once Sutton was out of earshot. You're a grown woman legally married. It's not me I'm worried about, Eleanor admitted. It's you. You heard his threats, his insinuations about the fire. Empty threats. Matthew insisted, though doubt shadowed his eyes. The fire was investigated. It was ruled accidental. But you left before the final determination, Eleanor pointed out. And my father has influence even here in Wyoming territory. Timothy looked between them, confusion and fear plain on his young face. Who was that man? Why is he angry? Eleanor knelt to the boy's level. That was my father, Timothy. He wants me to go back east with him to see my mother who is ill. Are you going to go? The question contained all of Timothy's insecurity, his fear of abandonment after losing his mother so recently. No, Eleanor assured him firmly. My place is here with you and Mr. Harden. Nothing will change that. Timothy nodded, though worry still creased his brow. He looked mean. He can be difficult, Eleanor acknowledged, but he can't separate us. We're a family now, remember? A real family, Timothy repeated, clinging to the promise they had made him. That's right, Matthew confirmed, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Now back to bed. Everything will look better in the morning. After Timothy had returned to his room, Matthew and Eleanor faced each other in the quiet darkness, the joy of their engagement overshadowed by Sutton's sudden appearance. He won't give up easily, Eleanor warned. I know my father. He's determined, vindictive when crossed. Let him try whatever he intends, Matthew said, drawing her close. We've overcome worse to be together. We won't be separated again. Eleanor rested her head against his chest, drawing strength from his certainty even as doubt gnawed at her. He'll use the fire against you, Michael. He'll twist the truth, use his influence. Then we'll face it together, Matthew promised, the truth on our side. But as they stood there in the darkness, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound happiness hung by a thread vulnerable to the machinations of a man who had already proven he would stop at nothing to get his way. Judge Sutton wasted no time. By noon the following day, rumors were circulating in Redfern Ridge about Matthew Harden's past, his true identity, the deadly fire in Boston, his flight from potential charges. The judge had taken rooms at the town's small hotel and was holding court in the saloon, sharing his version of events with anyone who would listen. Charlotte Webb brought word to the ranch, her expression grave. It's bad, Eleanor. He's painting Matthew as a fugitive from justice, claiming the fire wasn't accidental at all, but the result of either criminal negligence or deliberate arson. That's absurd, Eleanor protested. Michael would never intentionally harm anyone, let alone his own congregation. I know that, Charlotte assured her, and those who know Matthew will see through the judge's claims. But Sutton is persuasive, and he carries the authority of his position. Some folks are listening. Matthew, who had been silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Let them talk. Words can't change the truth. Words shape perception, Charlotte countered gently, and perception can be more powerful than truth, especially in a small community. Eleanor paced the kitchen, mind racing. We need to counter his narrative. Show the town who Matthew really is, what kind of man he truly is. How? Matthew asked. It's his word against mine, a respected judge versus a rancher with a hidden past. Not just his word, Eleanor corrected. Mine too, and Charlotte's, and everyone else whose lives you've touched here. She turned to Charlotte. Will you help us? Of course, the doctor replied without hesitation. Matthew saved my life last winter when my buggy overturned in that blizzard. I haven't forgotten. And Timothy? Eleanor continued, building momentum. The town knows you took him in, provided a home when he had none. That speaks to your character more than any accusations my father can make. Matthew looked between the two women, a reluctant hope kindling in his eyes. You really think we can counter Sutton's influence? We have to try, Eleanor insisted. I won't let him destroy what we've built here, not again. With Charlotte's help, they formulated a plan. The doctor would speak to her patients, many of whom had benefited from Matthew's quiet assistance over the years, a barn raised after a fire, livestock tended during illness, fences mended after storms. Eleanor would address the town at the school's end-of-term celebrations scheduled for the following evening. And Matthew would continue, as he always had, honest, hard-working, present, letting his actions speak where words might fail. That night, after Timothy was asleep, Eleanor and Matthew sat together on the porch, the weight of Sutton's threats heavy between them. There's something I need to tell you, Matthew said, finally breaking their contemplative silence. About the fire. Eleanor turned to him, alert to the tension in his voice. What is it? Matthew stared into the darkness as if seeing that fateful night played out before him. I did leave the candle burning near the curtains, he admitted. That part is true. But I wasn't simply careless. I was distracted because I just received a note. A note, Eleanor prompted when he fell silent. Delivered just before the service. It said, leave Boston tonight or face the consequences. This is your final warning. Matthew's hands clenched on his knees. I was so angry, so focused on who might have sent it, that I wasn't paying proper attention to my surroundings. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. You think my father sent it? I don't know, Matthew admitted, but the timing coming the day after his visit, his threats, it seemed too coincidental. Did you keep the note? Show it to investigators? Matthew shook his head. It burned in the fire. And afterward, with 7 people dead, it seemed inconsequential, self-serving to suggest someone else might bear even partial responsibility. Eleanor absorbed this new information, its implications rippling through her understanding of the past. You believe my father might have orchestrated the circumstances that led to the fire, even if he didn't intend the tragic outcome. I don't know what to believe, Matthew said wearily. For years I've carried the full weight of guilt for those deaths. The possibility that your father's interference contributed to my distraction that night, it doesn't change my responsibility, but it complicates the narrative Sutton is now spreading. Eleanor took his hand, fingers interlacing with his. We need to confront him, together. Make him understand he can't manipulate us again. Matthew squeezed her hand, but doubt shadowed his features. What if he does have evidence against me? What if he really could bring charges after all these years? Then we'll face that too, Eleanor said with determination. Together. The word hung between them, a promise and a shield against whatever might come. The school's end-of-term celebration was held in the town's small church, the only building in Red Fern Ridge large enough to accommodate the entire community. Eleanor had spent the day preparing with her students, organizing recitations and songs to demonstrate their progress under her tutelage. Timothy had been assigned a reading from Robinson Crusoe, his favorite book, in a piece that held special significance for him as a connection to his mother. He practiced diligently, determined to make both his guardians and Sarah's memory proud. As evening approached, Eleanor dressed with particular care, selecting a blue dress that Matthew had once mentioned brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her hair simply but elegantly and wore both rings he had given her, the plain band of their civil ceremony and the diamond that symbolized their renewed commitment. Matthew, too, had made an effort, wearing a suit that Eleanor had never seen before, his hair neatly trimmed, his face freshly shaved. With Timothy between them in his Sunday best, they presented the image of a proper family as they drove to town. The church was already crowded when they arrived, buzzing with the excited voices of children and parents. Eleanor noted with dismay that her father had secured a prominent position in the front row, his distinguished appearance drawing respectful attention from those around him. Mayor Collins approached them as they entered, his expression troubled. Evening hardens, quite a turnout tonight. He nodded towards Sutton. Your father's been making quite an impression, Mrs. Harden. Generous donation to the school building fund this afternoon. How convenient, Eleanor remarked dryly. He's always believed in the power of strategic philanthropy. The mayor shifted uncomfortably. We'll best get started. Children are getting restless. The program began with the youngest students reciting simple poems and singing songs they had learned. Proud parents beamed as their children performed, temporarily setting aside the rumors and speculation that had dominated town gossip for the past day. When it was Timothy's turn, the boy stepped forward with surprising confidence. He glanced once at Matthew and Eleanor for reassurance, then began to read from Robinson Crusoe in a clear, steady voice that carried to the back of the church. It would make a stoic smile to have seen me and my little family sit down to dinner, Timothy read. There was my majesty, the prince and lord of the whole island. I had the lives of all my subjects at my absolute command. I could hang, draw, give liberty, and take it away, and no rebels among all my subjects. As he continued, Eleanor noticed Judge Sutton watching the boy with narrowed eyes, calculating something behind his impassive expression. The scrutiny made her uneasy, though Timothy himself seemed oblivious, focused entirely on his reading. When the children's presentations concluded, Mayor Collins called for Eleanor to address the gathering as was customary for the teacher at term's end. She rose, moving to the small podium with measured steps, feeling the weight of every gaze upon her, none more heavily than her father's. Good evening, friends and neighbors. She began, her being steady despite her inner turmoil. As we conclude another school term, I find myself reflecting on the meaning of education, of community, of family. She paused, gathering her thoughts, then continued with growing conviction. When I came to Red Fern Ridge last fall, I was Sister Eleanor Grace, dedicated to my faith and my calling as a teacher. I could not have imagined how my life would change in the months that followed, how this community would welcome me, how tragedy would reshape my path, how love would find me again when I least expected it. Her gaze found Matthew in the crowd, drawing strength from his presence. Many of you know that my husband and I married under unusual circumstances, brought together by a dying woman's wish for her son's future. What you may not know is that Matthew and I had met before many years ago in Boston, where we were once engaged to be married. A murmur ran through the congregation at this revelation. Eleanor continued, her voice clear and unwavering. Fate separated us then through circumstances neither of us could control. For 10 years we lived apart, each believing the other lost. That we found each other again here in this remote corner of Wyoming territory seems nothing short of miraculous to me, a testament to God's mysterious workings in our lives. She turned slightly to address her father directly. Some would have you believe that my husband is not the man you've known these past years, that he is hiding from a shameful past, that he bears responsibility for a tragic fire that claimed innocent lives. Sutton's expression darkened, but Eleanor pressed on. The truth is both simpler and more complex. Yes, my husband was once Michael Harrington, a Presbyterian minister in Boston. Yes, there was a fire in his church that resulted in terrible loss of life. And yes, he left Boston afterward, overcome by guilt and grief. But the man you know as Matthew Harden, the man who has built a life here through honest work and quiet integrity, who has helped many of you in times of need, who took in an orphaned boy and gave him a home, that man is the true measure of his character, not the tragic accident that drove him west. Eleanor's gaze swept the room, meeting the eyes of those who had come to know her over the months of her teaching. I stand before you not just as your children's teacher, but as a woman who has found her way back to love after years of loss. I ask you to judge us not by rumors or accusations, but by the lives we have lived among you, the family we are building, the good we strive to do. She returned to her seat amid a charged silence, her heart pounding, but her spirit resolute. Matthew reached for her hand as she sat beside him, his touch conveying both pride and gratitude. Mayor Collins cleared his throat, clearly unsure how to proceed after such an unexpected address. Well, that concludes our formal program. Refreshments are available in the churchyard. As the gathering began to disperse, Judge Sutton approached, his face a mask of controlled anger. An impressive performance, Emily, he said coldly. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. It wasn't a performance, Father, Eleanor replied evenly. Just the truth simply stated. The truth, Sutton repeated skeptically. Let's discuss truth privately, shall we? You, me, and your husband. Matthew stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Eleanor and her father. Anything you have to say to us can be said right here, Judge. Very well. Sutton's voice lowered though the intensity increased. The truth, Mr. Harrington, is that I have sworn statements from 3 witnesses who claim you were seen arguing violently with Deacon Wright the day of the fire, the same Deacon Wright who died in that blaze along with his grandchildren. Matthew paled. That's a lie. Wright and I disagreed about church finances, but we never argued violently. He was my mentor, my friend. The statements suggest otherwise, Sutton countered smoothly. As does the note found in your office afterward, a note threatening to expose improprieties in your personal conduct. What note? Matthew demanded. There was no such note. No, Sutton raised an eyebrow. The Boston Fire Marshal's report mentions it specifically. Curious that you claim ignorance. Eleanor intervened, sensing Matthew's growing distress. What exactly do you want, Father? Why resurrect these painful events after so many years? Sutton turned to her, his expression softening marginally. I want you to come home, Emily. Your mother is dying. Whatever attachment you've formed here can be dissolved discreetly. No one need ever know about this unfortunate episode. And if I refuse, then I will have no choice but to present my evidence to the territorial authorities, Sutton stated flatly. Your husband may have escaped justice in Boston, but Wyoming takes a dim view of men who flee responsibility for multiple deaths. Timothy appeared at Matthew's side, sensing the tension, though not understanding its cause. Mr. Harden, can we go home now? Matthew placed a protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Soon, Timothy. Why don't you go find Dr. Mall? Webb, tell her we'll be ready to leave shortly. After Timothy reluctantly departed, Matthew faced Sutton squarely. Your evidence is fabricated, Judge. There was no violent argument with Wright, no threatening note. The fire was a tragic accident, nothing more. Perhaps, Sutton conceded with a cold smile. But perception, as they say, is reality. And I have the means to shape perception quite effectively even here in your adopted home. You would destroy an innocent man's life, Eleanor asked, appalled anew at her father's ruthlessness. Separate a child from the only family he has left, all to force me to return to Boston. To save you from your own foolishness, Sutton corrected, to preserve our family name, our position, to fulfill your mother's dying wish to see her only daughter once more. Eleanor stared at the man she had once revered, seeing now the calculating manipulator beneath the veneer of paternal concern. If mother truly wishes to see me, you have only to ask. I would never refuse her that comfort. But I will not leave my husband or our son, not for you, not for Boston society, not for anything. Then you leave me no choice, Sutton said with finality. I'll be presenting my evidence to Sheriff Daniels tomorrow morning. I suggest you use tonight to consider your options carefully. With a curt nod, he turned and walked away, moving through the crowd with the confidence of a man accustomed to deference. Eleanor and Matthew stood frozen, the weight of Sutton's threats settling over them like a shroud. Around them, the community celebration continued, parents congratulating children, neighbors sharing news, life proceeding normally while their world threatened to unravel. He's bluffing, Matthew said finally, though uncertainty edged his voice. There can't be witness statements or notes. It didn't happen that way. Whether they exist or not doesn't matter, Eleanor replied grimly. My father has resources influence. He could manufacture evidence if necessary. What do we do? Matthew asked the question, stripped of pretense, one partner to another, facing a common threat. Eleanor took his hand, the diamond on her finger catching the lamplight. We fight, she said simply, together. No running this time, no separation. We stand our ground and face whatever comes. The determination in her voice seemed to steady him. Matthew nodded, squeezing her hand. Together, he agreed. They found Timothy with Charlotte, the boy animatedly describing his reading performance, while the doctor listened with appropriate admiration. Seeing their approach, Charlotte raised an eyebrow in silent question. Time to go home, Matthew told Timothy, keeping his tone deliberately light. You did wonderfully tonight. Everyone clapped, Timothy said proudly. Even that grumpy man, your father, he added to Eleanor. Did he? Eleanor murmured, surprised that Sutton would make even that small concession. Charlotte drew her aside as Matthew helped Timothy with his coat. Your father cornered me earlier, she said quietly. Just a lot of questions about you, Matthew, your relationship with Timothy. What did you tell him? The truth that you're a devoted teacher, that Matthew is respected in the community, that Timothy is thriving in your care. Charlotte's expression grew troubled. He seemed particularly interested in Timothy's background, his mother, how you came to be his guardians. The information sent a chill through Eleanor. Thank you for warning me. We need to be careful. My father is determined. I gathered as much, Charlotte said dryly. If you need anything, support a witness to Matthew's character, anything at all, you have only to ask. Eleanor embraced her friend gratefully. Thank you. We may need that support sooner rather than later. The ride home was subdued, Timothy eventually falling asleep against Matthew's shoulder, exhausted by the excitement of the evening. Eleanor drove, allowing Matthew to hold the sleeping boy, her mind racing with possible strategies to counter her father's threats. At the ranch, they settled Timothy in his bed, the boy barely stirring as Matthew removed his shoes and tucked the blankets around him. They stood together for a moment, watching him sleep, both acutely aware of how much was at stake. Downstairs, Eleanor built up the fire while Matthew poured them each a small measure of whiskey, a rare indulgence that spoke to the gravity of their situation. If your father goes to the sheriff tomorrow, Matthew began, I could be arrested. At minimum, there would be an investigation, inquiries sent to Boston, my past fully exposed. Eleanor nodded, accepting the glass he offered. The